Montana Territory, 1887. Winter had settled over the Bitterroot Valley like a heavy shroud, transforming the landscape into a vast expanse of white. The cold bit deep, a reminder of nature's indifference to the struggles of men who dared to carve out lives in this unforgiving wilderness. Jack Thornton's breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he urged his horse forward through thickening snow. The gray afternoon sky promised more to come, and he was still miles from his ranch. The lingering scars of the economic collapse of '83 could be seen in the abandoned homesteads they passed, silent monuments to broken dreams. "Come on, girl," he murmured to the mare. "Just a little farther." The horse snorted, steam rising from her nostrils, as she struggled against the strengthening wind. Jack pulled his worn coat tighter, the threadbare wool offering little protection against the biting cold. His weathered face, lined with 45 years of hardship, remained stoic despite the numbness creeping into his limbs. The storm hit with sudden ferocity. What had been steady snowfall transformed into a blinding white maelstrom. The wind howled like a wounded beast, driving ice crystals that stung Jack's face like tiny needles. His horse, panicked by the onslaught, reared suddenly. "Easy, easy," Jack shouted, but his voice was torn away by the wind. The mare bucked, eyes rolling with fear. Jack, his fingers stiff with cold, lost his grip on the reins. He tumbled backward, the world spinning in a blur of white before he slammed into the frozen creek below. The ice cracked. Cold water shocked his system as he plunged into the dark current beneath. The weight of his sodden clothes dragged him down, the cold so intense it burned. His lungs screamed for air as the current pulled him under the ice. "This is how I die," he thought with strange clarity. Then strong hands gripped his collar, hauling him upward with surprising strength. Jack broke the surface, gasping and sputtering, as a stranger dragged him onto solid ice. Through water-blurred vision, he saw a bearded face framed by a fur-lined hood. "On your feet," the man commanded. "Can't stay here." Jack tried to stand, his waterlogged clothes already freezing in the brutal air. His rescuer shouldered Jack's weight with surprising strength, guiding him toward a small cabin Jack hadn't noticed before. Inside, the stranger worked quickly, stripping Jack's frozen clothes and wrapping him in rough woolen blankets before stoking a small fire to roaring life. As warmth slowly returned to Jack's body, he studied his savior. The man was tall and lean, with intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence in his movements. "Name's Thomas Finch," the man said, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "You're lucky I was checking my traps." "Jack Thornton," he managed through chattering teeth. "I owe you my life." Finch shrugged. Any man would do the same. They shared a simple meal of beans and jerky as the storm raged outside. Jack learned Finch was a surveyor, mapping the territory for the railway companies and mineral deposits. He spoke with passion about the land, not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, Finch grew quiet, contemplative. "Strange how paths cross," he said finally. "I've heard of you, Thornton, your place up by Eagle Creek, right?" Jack nodded, surprised. "This territory has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most," Finch continued. "Remember that." In the morning the storm had passed. Finch led Jack to where his horse stood waiting, apparently found and tethered by his rescuer. "I'll be moving on," Finch said, adjusting Jack's saddle. "Got work eastward." "If you're ever near Eagle Creek," Jack began. "I might be," Finch interrupted, his gaze distant. "Someday I might come back, and I might need your help then." He extended his hand. "A life for a life, that's the way of things out here." Jack gripped the offered hand, feeling the calluses of a man who knew hard work. "A life for a life," he agreed. He watched Finch disappear into the pristine white landscape, never suspecting how prophetic those words would prove to be. 10 years later, the bank in Silverdale seemed smaller than Jack remembered. Perhaps it was the weight of the debt papers in his pocket that diminished it. Or perhaps it was the knowledge of what awaited him inside. Maxwell Payne sat behind a polished oak desk, his tailored suit and gold watch chain speaking of prosperity that had eluded most in the territory. At 48, Payne had the sharp, hungry look of a man who had clawed his way to prominence through cunning and ruthless determination. "Mr. Thornton," Payne said, not rising from his seat, "I was beginning to think you might not come." Jack stood straight despite the ache in his back from the long ride. His face, weathered and scarred, betrayed nothing of his inner turmoil. You know why I'm here, Payne? Indeed. Payne shuffled through papers with manicured fingers. The loan your father took out in '75. With interest, the amount stands at $643. He looked up, a smile not reaching his eyes. A substantial sum. Jack placed a leather pouch on the desk. 200, it's all I have until spring. Payne made no move to touch the money. The full amount was due last month, as you well know. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. However, I might be persuaded to offer an extension. The railroad is expanding. Your land sits on a potentially valuable route. My father homesteaded that land legally, Jack said, his voice low and controlled despite the anger rising within him. I have the deed. Payne's laugh was colder than the Montana winter. Ah, yes, your father's signature on a claim filed with the territorial office. He lifted a document from his desk. Unfortunately, the boundary markers described don't match the current survey. There are discrepancies. What discrepancies? Technical matters, Mr. Thornton. Suffice to say, your claim might not be as solid as you believe. Payne's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. You have 90 days to produce the original survey notes and boundary markers, or the deed will be invalidated. Jack's fists clenched at his sides. That's impossible, and you know it. Those notes are 15 years old. Then I suggest you start looking. Payne pushed Jack's money pouch back across the desk. This won't be necessary until you've resolved the irregularities. Several townspeople had entered the bank during their conversation. Payne raised his voice slightly. I'm afraid squatters' rights don't hold up in territorial court, Thornton. Perhaps if your father had been more careful with his paperwork. Hot shame and rage burned in Jack's chest. He was being publicly humiliated, and Payne was enjoying every moment of it. With deliberate control, Jack took his money and turned toward the door. 90 days, Thornton, Payne called after him. After that, I'll be forced to take possession. It's nothing personal, just business. But the gleam in Payne's eyes told a different story. This was personal, though Jack couldn't fathom why. Outside, the cold air did little to cool Jack's anger. He mounted his horse, the familiar motion aggravating old wounds from a war he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. As he rode through town, he felt the weight of stares from windows and boardwalks. Some sympathetic, others merely curious about the man who might soon lose everything. The ride home was long and silent, giving Jack too much time to think. Memories surfaced unbidden, his father's calloused hands showing him how to build a fence that would stand against the Montana winters. His son Matthew's laughter as they fished the creek that bordered their property. His wife Sarah's tears the day she finally left, unable to bear the grief that had consumed them both after Matthew's death. By the time the ranch came into view, the setting sun painted the snow-covered fields in shades of gold and purple. It wasn't much. A sturdy cabin, a barn that leaned slightly to the north, a corral, and a chicken coop, but it was all Jack had left in the world. He dismounted stiffly, his old wounds complaining after the long ride. As he led his horse toward the barn, a figure emerged from the shadows. You look like hell, Lucas Chen said, taking the reins from Jack's hands. At 35, Lucas was lean and strong, his Chinese heritage evident in his features, but his Montana accent as authentic as any born in the territory. He'd come to work for Jack 5 years ago, one of the few who'd treat a Chinese man with respect after the railway work had dried up. Feel worse, Jack grunted. Payne didn't agree to the extension? Jack shook his head. Says there's a problem with the boundary survey, wants the original notes and markers. Lucas frowned. Those would be with the territorial office, wouldn't they? Should be, but Payne seemed mighty confident they won't be found. Jack rubbed his face wearily. I've got 90 days before he moves to take the land. They walked toward the house in silence, the crunch of snow under their boots the only sound in the gathering dusk. At the porch steps, Jack paused, his gaze drawn to the small fence plot on the rise behind the cabin. 3 wooden crosses stood stark against the snow, his father, his son, and an empty grave for his wife, who had left but whose spirit had died here just the same. I'll see to the horses, Lucas said quietly, understanding in his eyes. There's stew on the stove. Jack nodded his thanks, but instead of going inside, he trudged through the snow toward the graves. The cold bit through his clothes as he knelt beside the smallest cross, brushing away the fresh powder to reveal the name carved into the wood. Matthew Thornton, 1876 to 1882. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered. "I might lose it all." The winter wind was his only answer, carrying the distant howl of wolves from the mountains. Jack remained kneeling until the cold numbed his knees and the stars appeared in the darkening sky. Only then did he return to the cabin, to the emptiness that had been his companion for too many years. Inside, Jack lit the oil lamp and stirred the fire back to life. The cabin was simple but solid, built by his father's hands and maintained by his own. A rough-hewn table with 3 chairs dominated the main room. One chair had sat empty for 5 years since Sarah left. Another had been empty for even longer, since they'd laid Matthew in the frozen ground. From a shelf above the fireplace, Jack took down a small wooden box. Inside lay a daguerreotype in a tarnished frame, his family as they once were. Matthew sat on Sarah's lap, his smile revealing missing front teeth, while Jack stood behind them, his hand on Sarah's shoulder. His father stood to the side, proud and strong, despite his advancing years. How had it all slipped away? First his father, taken by pneumonia after a brutal winter. Then Matthew, consumed by fever while Jack watched helplessly. Sarah had held on for almost a year afterward, but grief had carved a chasm between them that neither could cross. Jack returned the picture to its place and reached instead for a battered tin cup, filling it with whiskey from a nearly empty bottle. The liquor burned a familiar path down his throat as he sank into his chair by the fire. From beneath his mattress, he retrieved a small book, a collection of poems someone had left behind at the general store. Jack couldn't read well, having had little formal schooling, but he'd taught himself enough over the years. Each night he read aloud to Matthew's memory, stumbling over the difficult words but persevering just the same. "I wandered lonely as a cloud," he began, his rough voice softening around the words, "that floats on high o'er vales and hills." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows as the temperature dropped further. Snow began to fall again, adding to the blanket that covered the land. Jack read until the whiskey was gone and his eyes grew heavy, then banked the fire for the night. In his dreams, he was always searching for something just beyond reach, following a trail that disappeared in the snow. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Jack stood at the well, breaking the ice that had formed overnight, when he noticed something strange in the distance. A column of smoke rose from the northern boundary of his property, where no smoke should be. "Lucas," he called, gesturing toward the anomaly. "You see that?" Lucas emerged from the barn, following Jack's pointing finger. "Campfire, maybe? Kinda small for a wildfire." "No one camps out in this weather unless they're in trouble," Jack said, already moving toward the barn. "I'm going to check it out." "I'll come with you," Lucas offered. Jack shook his head. "Stay here, keep an eye on things." The memory of Payne's threat was still fresh. Could be nothing, could be trouble. He saddled his mare quickly, checking his rifle before sliding it into the scabbard. The smoke was still visible, a thin gray line against the blue sky. Jack urged his horse forward, following the fence line that marked the northern boundary of his property. As he approached, the wind shifted, bringing with it the acrid smell of burning wood and something else, a faint cry that raised the hair on the back of his neck. He spurred his horse forward, snow flying from the animal's hooves as they galloped toward the sound. The fence post came into view first, the corner marker of his property. Beside it, nearly buried in a snowdrift, lay the source of the smoke, the smoldering remains of what might have been a campfire, now almost extinguished by the snow. And then he saw them, a small figure huddled against the fence post, nearly invisible beneath a snow-covered blanket. As Jack dismounted and approached, the blanket moved slightly, and a weak whimper emerged. Jack knelt and gently pulled back the frost-stiffened cloth. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, looked up at him with unfocused, fever-bright eyes. Her lips were blue, her face pale with cold. Clutched in her arms was a small brown puppy, shivering violently. "Help!" the girl whispered, the word barely audible. Without hesitation, Jack stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the child and the dog. The bitter cold immediately assaulted him, but he ignored it, gathering the small bundle into his arms. "I've got you," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I've got you now." The girl's eyes fluttered closed as Jack lifted her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, holding her securely against his chest as he turned the animal toward home. The cold tore at him, seeping through his clothes, but he urged the horse to greater speed, knowing the child's life depended on warmth and shelter. "Stay with me," he murmured into her matted hair. "Just stay with me." By the time the cabin came into view, Jack's hands were numb, his body shaking with cold. Lucas ran to meet them, his face registering alarm at Jack's condition and the bundle in his arms. "A child," Jack managed through chattering teeth. "Found her by the north fence." Lucas took the bundle, allowing Jack to dismount stiffly. "She's half frozen, the dog too." Together they hurried toward the cabin. Inside, Lucas laid the girl gently on Jack's bed while Jack built up the fire until it roared in the hearth. The girl's clothes were soaked and frozen stiff. They would need to be cut away. "Get her out of those clothes," Jack said, reaching for his knife. "I'll heat some water." While Lucas carefully cut away the frozen garments, Jack melted snow in a pot over the fire, adding herbs from a small supply Sarah had left behind. The cabin gradually warmed as they worked, steam rising from the pot and fogging the window. The puppy, freed from the girl's arms, proved to be more resilient. Though one of its paws was scraped raw, it shook itself and wobbled around the cabin, whimpering occasionally. The girl was another matter. Even as they wrapped her in every blanket in the cabin, she remained alarmingly cold to the touch. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak. "She needs a doctor," Lucas said. His normally impassive face creased with worry. Jack nodded grimly. "Doc Sullivan's the closest, but town's a half-day's ride in this weather." He looked down at the child's pale face. "She won't make it that far." "Then we bring the doc here," Lucas said decisively. "I'll go, I'm fresher, and Lightning's the fastest horse we've got." Jack hesitated, torn between the need for medical help and his reluctance to send Lucas out into the brutal cold. But one look at the girl's blue-tinged lips decided him. "Be careful," he said. "The trail will be treacherous." Lucas nodded, already pulling on his heaviest coat. "Keep her warm. Try to get some broth into her if she wakes." After Lucas departed, Jack sat beside the bed, watching the girl's shallow breathing. He dipped a cloth in the warm herbal water and gently bathed her face and hands, hoping to bring some warmth back to her frigid skin. "Who are you, little one?" he murmured. "And what were you doing out there alone?" As if in response, the girl stirred slightly, her cracked lips moving in silent words. Jack leaned closer, but could make out nothing coherent. Around her neck, he noticed a thin silver chain. Carefully, he lifted it to reveal a small, dented locket. On the back, engraved in fine script, were the letters HF 1979. HF. The initials stirred something in Jack's memory, a name from the past, but he couldn't place it. The puppy had settled on the floor near the bed, its eyes never leaving the girl. One of its paws was bandaged with a strip of clean cloth, Lucas's work before he left. Despite its own injuries, the animal's loyalty was unwavering. "You're a good friend," Jack told the dog, scratching behind its ears. "She's lucky to have you." Throughout the long afternoon, Jack maintained his vigil, replacing cooling cloths with warm ones, stoking the fire, speaking softly to the unconscious child. The puppy eventually curled up on the bed near the girl's feet, adding its small warmth to the battle against the cold. Outside, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk when Jack heard the girl speak her first clear words. "Papa said," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "Papa said find the rancher by the creek. He knows about the rose compass." "What's that?" Jack asked gently. "What's the rose compass?" But the girl had slipped back into unconsciousness, her face flushed now with fever rather than pale with cold, a change that worried Jack almost as much as her previous state. He placed a hand on her forehead, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. "Fight it," he urged. "You've made it this far. Don't give up now." Jack had watched fever take his son, despite everything he and Sarah could do. He'd held Matthew's small hand as it grew cold and still. The memory of that helplessness threatened to overwhelm him as he looked down at this unknown child who had somehow found her way to his door. "Not again," he thought fiercely. "Not if I can help it." Night had fallen completely when Jack heard the approach of horses. He moved to the window, rifle ready, until he recognized Lucas's tall figure dismounting. Behind him, another horse carried a smaller rider bundled against the cold. The cabin door opened, admitting a blast of frigid air followed by Lucas and Dr. Rebecca Sullivan. At 40, Rebecca was still striking, with dark hair streaked with silver and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She shed her outer garments quickly, already focused on her patient. "How long has she been feverish?" she asked without preamble, moving to the bedside. "Since about midday," Jack replied, stepping back to give her room. "She was nearly frozen when I found her." Rebecca nodded, her capable hands already examining the child. The transition from hypothermia to fever is common. Her body's fighting back. She glanced up at Jack. "You did well to get her warm. Many would have given up." The simple praise, delivered in Rebecca's matter-of-fact manner, stirred complicated feelings in Jack. They had once been friends, more than friends perhaps, before Sarah. Then, after Matthew's death, they had drifted apart, the weight of shared grief and failure too heavy for their fragile connection. Rebecca had been the one to tell them nothing more could be done for Matthew. She had stayed with them through that final night, her own tears mingling with theirs. Afterward, Jack had avoided her, unable to face the woman who represented his greatest loss. Now she worked efficiently, her focus entirely on her new patient. "I need clean water, as hot as you can make it without burning. And any herbs you have, yarrow or willow bark would be best." Jack moved to comply while Lucas tended to the horses. The familiar routine of heating water and preparing herbs calmed him somewhat, giving him a purpose beyond waiting and worrying. When he returned with the requested items, Rebecca was gently washing the girl's face and neck with a cloth. "Her name is Hannah," she said. "She told me before she drifted off again." "Hannah Finch." The name struck Jack like a physical blow. "Finch?" Rebecca nodded, not looking up from her work. "Mean something to you?" Jack hesitated. "Maybe. I knew a Thomas Finch once, years ago." "Well, she's wearing a locket with HF engraved on it. Could be a connection." Rebecca efficiently mixed herbs into the hot water. "Help me sit her up. She needs to drink this." Together they raised the semi-conscious child, coaxing her to swallow the bitter herbal tea. Hannah complied weakly, her eyes fluttering open occasionally, but not focusing on anything. "Papa," she murmured once. "Papa said the rose compass." "She mentioned that before," Jack said. "Something about finding the rancher by the creek and a rose compass. Mean anything to you?" Rebecca shook her head. Could be fever talk, or a message she was meant to deliver. She laid a cool hand on Hannah's forehead. "Her fever's still climbing. We need to cool her down." They worked through the night, applying cool cloths when Hannah burned with fever, piling on blankets when she shivered with chills. The puppy remained at the foot of the bed, occasionally whining softly as if sensing its young owner's distress. Dawn was breaking when Hannah's fever finally broke. Her breathing eased, her sleep becoming more natural. Rebecca, exhausted but satisfied, finally sat back in a chair by the fire. "She'll sleep now," she said. "The worst is past, I think." Jack handed her a cup of coffee, strong and black. "Thank you." Rebecca accepted the cup, studying him over the rim as she sipped. "You look like hell, Jack." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So I've been told." "Not just from tonight. You haven't been taking care of yourself." Jack shrugged. "Been busy?" "Been hiding," Rebecca corrected gently, "ever since Sarah left." The mention of his wife's name was like probing an old wound, painful but no longer unbearable. "Not much point in fussing over appearances out here." Rebecca's gaze softened. "I wasn't talking about appearances." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. 5 years of unspoken words and avoided glances condensed into the small space of the cabin. Finally, Jack spoke. "Payne's trying to take the ranch." Rebecca's expression sharpened. "What? How?" "Says there's a problem with the boundary survey. Gave me 90 days to prove my claim." Jack ran a hand through his graying hair. "Don't know if I can." "Maxwell Payne is a snake," Rebecca said flatly. "If he's after your land, there's more to it than paperwork." "Maybe, but without the original survey notes, I don't have much of a case." Jack's gaze drifted to the sleeping child. "And now this, a girl appears out of nowhere, half dead, with the name Finch. You think there's a connection?" "I don't know. Finch saved my life once, 10 years ago. Said he might come back someday, might need my help." Jack touched the locket still hanging around Hannah's neck. 1879, that's when my father filed his claim." Rebecca leaned forward. Jack, if this girl is Thomas Finch's daughter, and if Finch had something to do with the original survey, then her showing up now isn't coincidence, Jack finished. They both looked at Hannah, sleeping peacefully now, unaware of the questions swirling around her. The first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, illuminating her small face, so vulnerable yet somehow determined even in sleep. "What will you do with her?" Rebecca asked softly. Jack didn't hesitate. "Keep her safe, until we know more." Rebecca nodded, her eyes meeting his. "That's the Jack I remember." Before he could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. Jack moved quickly, positioning himself between the bed and the entrance, hand moving instinctively to the rifle prop nearby. "Who's there?" he called. "Lucas, and we've got company." Jack opened the door cautiously. Lucas stood on the porch, his expression grim. Behind him, mounted on a sleek black horse and flanked by two hard-faced men, was Maxwell Payne. "Thornton," Payne called, his voice carrying in the crisp morning air. "I hear you found something that belongs to the county." Jack stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "What are you talking about, Payne?" "The orphan," Payne said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Word travels fast, even in winter. As county commissioner, I have a responsibility toward parentless children." "She's sick," Jack said flatly. "Doc Sullivan's treating her." "Ah, the good doctor." Payne tipped his hat toward the cabin. "All the more reason to ensure the child receives proper care in town." Jack's jaw tightened. "She stays until she's well enough to travel." Payne dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to one of his men. "I'm afraid I must insist. Orphans are wards of the county until suitable arrangements can be made." "How do you know she's an orphan?" Lucas asked, his usually calm voice edged with suspicion. Payne's gaze flicked to him dismissively. "It's obvious, isn't it? A child alone in the wilderness in winter. No parent would allow such a thing unless they were no longer able to provide care." Jack took a step forward, hands clenching at his sides. "The girl stays until she can tell us herself what happened. Then we'll decide what's best." "The law is clear, Thornton." Payne reached inside his coat and produced an official-looking document. "As county commissioner, I have the authority to place orphan children in appropriate care. And a half-dead child found on the borders of a failing ranch hardly constitutes appropriate care." The insult was deliberate, meant to provoke. Jack felt anger rising, hot and dangerous, but forced it down. Getting into a fight with Payne wouldn't help Hannah. "If you want her," he said quietly, "you'll have to go through me." For a moment, tension crackled between them like static before a lightning strike. Then the cabin door opened, and Rebecca stepped out, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "Mr. Payne," she said coolly, "as the attending physician, I can assure you the child is receiving excellent care. Moving her now would endanger her recovery." Payne's smile thinned. "Dr. Sullivan, always a pleasure, but medical concerns, while admirable, don't override county regulations." "Perhaps not," Rebecca agreed, "but a quarantine order does. The girl shows symptoms consistent with influenza. Moving her could spread infection throughout the town." Jack glanced at her, impressed by the quick thinking. Payne's expression darkened momentarily before he regained his composure. "Very well," he conceded. "A temporary delay, for medical reasons only." He folded the document and returned it to his coat. "But once she's recovered, the county will take custody. It's for her own good." "We'll see," Jack said. Payne stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Jack could hear. "I know you're in trouble, Thornton. I could make things easier for you." He nodded toward the cabin. "There's $200 in it for you if you sign temporary guardianship over to me, enough to clear your most pressing debts." The offer was unexpected and suspiciously generous. "Why do you care about one orphan, Payne?" "Let's just say I have a personal interest in children left alone in this harsh world." Payne's expression was unreadable. "We all have our philanthropic inclinations." Before Jack could respond, a small voice called from inside the cabin. "Mr. Jack, where are you?" Hannah had awakened. Jack turned automatically toward the sound, and in that unguarded moment, something like triumph flashed in Payne's eyes. "I'll return in 1 week," Payne said, mounting his horse with practiced grace. "Have her ready to travel, or the sheriff will become involved." With that, he and his men rode away, leaving Jack, Lucas, and Rebecca standing in the cold morning light. He knows something, Lucas said quietly. About the girl. Yes, Jack agreed, and he's willing to pay to get his hands on her. Rebecca frowned. $200 is a lot of money for an act of charity. They turned as one toward the cabin where Hannah's voice had called. Whatever secret the child carried, it was valuable enough for Maxwell Payne to ride out in the dead of winter with two armed men. And Jack had a feeling that the boundary dispute, Hannah's appearance, and Payne's unusual interest were connected in ways he was only beginning to understand. "Mr. Jack?" Hannah called again, her voice stronger now. Jack looked at Rebecca and Lucas, reading the same determination in their faces that he felt in his heart. "Let's find out who she is," he said, "before Payne gets his hands on her." They entered the cabin together, closing the door against the cold and the watchful eyes that might still be lingering on the ridge beyond. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, a bowl of thin broth cupped in her small hands. Color had returned to her cheeks, though her eyes still held the glassy sheen of recent fever. The puppy, she called him Scout, lay curled at her feet, one bandaged paw extended protectively across her ankle. "I was supposed to find the rancher by the creek," she said, her voice stronger than before but still carrying the fragile quality of a child who had faced too much. "Papa said he'd help me." Jack pulled his chair closer, keeping his voice gentle. "Your papa was Thomas Finch?" Hannah nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "He died 2 weeks ago. The cough took him." Her small fingers tightened around the bowl. Before he went, he told me to find the rancher who lives by Eagle Creek. Said to bring the locket and tell him about the rose compass." Rebecca and Lucas exchanged glances with Jack. The pieces were beginning to align, though the complete picture remained unclear. "I remember your father," Jack said carefully. "He saved my life years ago. I'm sorry he's gone." Hannah looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "Then you're the one Papa meant? The rancher by the creek?" "I think so." Jack reached out, hesitating before gently touching her shoulder. "Hannah, do you know why your father sent you to me? What's the rose compass?" The girl shook her head. "He just said it was important, that you'd understand when the time came." She reached for the silver locket around her neck, opening it with practiced fingers to reveal a small, folded piece of paper tucked inside. "He said to keep this safe until I found you." Jack took the paper with careful hands. Unfolded, it revealed a simple drawing, a circle with lines radiating outward like a compass rose, with numbers and letters marked at various points along the lines. At the center was written TF plus EF, 1879. "TF, Thomas Finch," Jack murmured. "But who's EF?" "My mama," Hannah said softly. "Emma Finch. She died when I was little." Rebecca leaned closer, studying the drawing. "It looks like survey coordinates," she said. "Sourced," she said. "See these numbers? They could be longitude and latitude markings." Lucas nodded. That would make sense if Thomas Finch was a surveyor. But what was he mapping? Jack recalled his conversation with Finch a decade ago. The man's passion when speaking about the land, his knowledge of mineral deposits and railway routes. A surveyor would know the true boundaries of property claims, would recognize if markers had been moved or maps altered. "The boundary dispute," he said suddenly. "Payne claims my property line is wrong. What if Finch knew the truth? What if this compass shows the original survey markers?" "That would explain Payne's interest in Hannah," Rebecca agreed. "If this proves your claim is valid, then he loses his chance to take my land." Jack folded the paper carefully and returned it to Hannah. "Keep this safe, just like your father asked." Hannah tucked the paper back into the locket and closed it. "Papa said it was our secret. He was scared someone would find it." "Did he mention a man named Payne?" Lucas asked gently. Hannah's face clouded. "Mr. Payne came to our cabin sometimes. Papa didn't like him. They argued." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The last time Mr. Payne said Papa would regret not taking the offer. That was 3 days before Papa got sick." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but understood by the adults. Jack felt a cold anger building, different from the hot rage he'd experienced in Payne's office. This was a steady, focused fury at the thought of a man who would threaten a dying man and then pursue his orphaned daughter. "You're safe here, Hannah," Jack said firmly. "I promise you that." The girl studied him with eyes too old for her young face. "Papa said you were a man who kept his promises." The simple statement, delivered with complete faith, struck Jack to his core. What had Finch told his daughter about him? How had the surveyor known enough about Jack Thornton to send his child to him in her hour of need? "I'll try to be worthy of that trust," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Rebecca touched his arm lightly, then turned to Hannah. "You need rest to recover your strength. Why don't you lie back while we talk about what to do next?" Once Hannah was settled again, Scout repositioning himself protectively beside her, the adults moved to the other side of the cabin to speak in low voices. "Payne will be back in a week," Jack said. "And if what Hannah says is true, he might have had something to do with Finch's death. We need to find out what this rose compass really shows," Rebecca said, "and we need to keep Hannah away from Payne until we do." Lucas nodded. "The territorial office in Helena might have the original survey records. I could ride there, see what I can find." "It's a long journey in winter," Jack cautioned. 4 days each way if the weather holds," Lucas agreed, "but worth it if it saves your land and keeps Hannah safe." Jack considered this, then nodded. "All right, but wait until tomorrow. Rest tonight and take the strongest horse we've got." Rebecca gathered her medical bag. "I should return to town before I'm missed. If Payne suspects I'm helping you, he might make things difficult." "Be careful," Jack warned. "Payne has influence in Silverdale." "So do I," Rebecca replied with a determined smile. "I've delivered or treated half the town at one point or another. That counts for something." After she left, Jack checked on Hannah, who had fallen asleep again, her small hand clutching the locket even in slumber. The puppy watched him with wary eyes, relaxing only when Jack retreated to a respectful distance. "Good dog," Jack murmured. "You take care of her." Lucas prepared for his journey, gathering supplies and studying their old dog-eared map of the territory. Jack spent the afternoon checking the cabin's defenses, cleaning his rifle and making sure windows and doors could be securely barricaded if necessary. Payne had left too easily. Jack didn't trust his apparent acceptance of Rebecca's quarantine story. Night fell early, the winter darkness draping over the land like a heavy shroud. Jack sat by the fire, his mind turning over the day's revelations. Hannah Finch, the rose compass, Payne's suspicious interest in both. Pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite assemble. "You should sleep," Lucas said, sitting across from him. "I'll take the first watch." Jack nodded gratefully. He hadn't realized how exhausted he was until that moment. "Wake me in 4 hours." But sleep brought dreams, vivid images of Thomas Finch standing in the snow, pointing toward the north corner of Jack's property. "The truth is buried," Dream Finch said. "Remember our agreement, a life for a life." Jack awoke with a start, the dream lingering like a physical presence in the darkened cabin. Hannah slept peacefully, Scout curled at her feet. Lucas sat by the window, rifle across his knees, keeping a silent vigil. "Everything all right?" Lucas asked quietly. "Just a dream," Jack replied, but he wasn't certain that was true. It had felt like more, like a memory surfacing, or a message delivered across the divide between life and death. Morning brought a brief respite from the biting cold, a pale sun shining from a cloudless sky. Jack watched as Lucas prepared to depart for Helena, loading saddlebags with provisions and strapping his bedroll securely behind the saddle. "Follow the ridge trail until you reach the old mining camp," Jack instructed. "It's longer but safer in winter. And stay alert. Payne might have men watching." Lucas nodded, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I'll be careful. Take care of the girl." "Safe journey," Jack said, clasping the younger man's shoulder briefly before stepping back. Hannah stood in the cabin doorway, bundled in a blanket, gout at her heels. She had insisted on saying goodbye, despite Jack's concerns about her health. Lucas," she called. "Thank you for helping me." Lucas smiled, a rare expression that softened his usually stoic features. "You rest and get strong, little one. I'll be back before you know it." With a final nod to Jack, Lucas mounted and rode away, the horse's hooves leaving a trail of disturbed snow that glittered in the morning light. Jack turned to Hannah. "Back inside now. It's too cold for you to be up yet." She obeyed without protest, though her eyes remained fixed on Lucas's receding figure until he disappeared around a bend in the trail. Inside, Jack stoked the fire and prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of their molasses. Hannah ate with surprising appetite, color returning to her cheeks with each passing hour. "Your cabin is nice," she said, looking around. "Papa and I had a smaller one near the mining camp." "You live just the two of you?" Jack asked gently. Hannah nodded. "Since Mama died. Papa taught me things. How to read tracks, how to find north without a compass, how to start a fire." Her voice caught. "He said knowledge was more valuable than gold." "Sounds like a wise man," Jack said, thinking of his own father's practical lessons in survival. After they finished eating, Jack took Hannah to the window that faced east across the property. The morning sun illuminated the landscape, revealing the layout of the small ranch. "See there, cowboys?" Jack pointed toward a cluster of pine trees. "That's where the best hunting is, come fall. Deer bed down there when the weather turns." His finger shifted to a distant meadow. "And there, wildflowers cover that whole stretch in spring. More colors than you can name." Hannah stood on tiptoe, her small hands braced on the windowsill, drinking in every detail. Scout watched attentively from beside her feet. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to a small structure near the creek. "Root cellar," Jack answered. "My father dug it when I was about your age. Showed me how to store vegetables through winter." A memory surfaced unexpectedly. "We'd make a game of it, seeing who could stack the potatoes higher without them falling." "Did you win?" Hannah asked, glancing up at him. Jack smiled faintly. "Not often. Pa had patient hands. Mine were always in too much of a hurry." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily over the meadow. "Could you teach me?" Hannah asked suddenly. "About the ranch? About stacking potatoes?" Jack looked down at her earnest face and felt something shift inside him, as if a door long rusted shut had creaked open just a fraction. "I could," he said softly. "Come spring, we'll plant some for you to stack." Hannah's smile, small but genuine, warmed something in Jack that had been cold for years. "He talked about you sometimes," Hannah continued, surprising him. "Said you were a brave man who'd faced hard times but kept going. That you lived by Eagle Creek and had the best water in the territory." Jack's throat tightened. The idea that Finch had spoken of him to his daughter, had somehow kept track of Jack's whereabouts over the years, was both comforting and unsettling. "Your father and I only met once," he said. "I'm surprised he remembered me." Hannah shook her head. "He said you left an impression, and that he owed you." "Owed me? He saved my life." "He said it was more complicated than that." Hannah fingered her locket thoughtfully. "That's why he was sure you'd help me if anything happened to him." The conversation left Jack with more questions than answers. What had Finch meant about owing Jack? And how had the surveyor known where to find him after all these years? The day passed quietly. Jack showed Hannah around the cabin, introduced her to the chickens in their coop, and let her help with simple chores when she insisted she was strong enough. Scout followed her everywhere, his initial wariness of Jack gradually fading as the day wore on. By evening, Hannah had claimed a corner of the cabin as her own, arranging her few possessions. The clothes she'd been wearing when found, now cleaned and mended by Jack, in a small wooden carving of a bird that had been in her pocket. "My papa made this," she explained, holding up the carving. "Said it was a finch, like our mom, a bird that sings even in winter." Jack's hands, rough from years of ranch work, looked enormous next to the delicate carving. "It's beautiful craftsmanship." "He made one every year on my birthday," Hannah said, her voice soft with memory. "I have 6 more at home. Or had them. I couldn't bring them when I ran." Jack felt a fresh surge of anger at whatever had driven this child to flee into a winter storm. "Hannah, can you tell me what happened? After your father passed?" Hannah's small face grew serious. "Papa died in his sleep. He'd been sick for days, coughing so hard it hurt him. That last night he called me to his bed and gave me the locket. Said I had to find you before Mr. Payne came back." Her voice trembled slightly. "The next morning, he was cold. I covered him with his blanket and ran, like he told me." Jack fought to keep his expression neutral despite the horror he felt at the thought of a child facing such a moment alone. "You were very brave," he said. "Braver than most grown men I know." Hannah ducked her head. "I was scared. I got lost in the snow. If Scout hadn't found that fence post—" "But you made it," Jack said firmly. "You did exactly what your father asked, and you survived. That's what matters." He helped her settle into a makeshift bed near the fire, Scout curling protectively at her feet. Once Hannah was asleep, Jack sat at the table, cleaning his rifle by the light of a single oil lamp, thoughts churning. Thomas Finch had known he was in danger. He'd sent his daughter to Jack with a cryptic message about a rose compass that somehow connected to Jack's boundary dispute with Payne. The coincidence was too perfect to be coincidence at all. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and driving fine snow through every crack in the cabin walls. Winter in Montana was unforgiving, especially for those caught, unprepared or unwary. Jack checked his ammunition, then banked the fire for the night, a sense of unease settling over him like the snow accumulating outside. Rebecca Sullivan arrived the next morning, her medical bag in one hand and a basket covered with a checkered cloth in the other. "Brought supplies," she announced, stamping snow from her boots before entering. "And news." Hannah brightened at the sight of her, Scout wagging his tail in recognition. Jack took the basket, nodding his thanks as Rebecca moved to examine her patient. "You look much better today," she told Hannah, placing a cool hand on the girl's forehead. "No fever. How do you feel?" "Better," Hannah confirmed. "Mr. Jack let me help feed the chickens this morning." "Did he now?" Rebecca glanced at Jack with approval. "Well, just don't overdo it. Your body needs time to recover." While Rebecca checked Hannah's lungs and throat, Jack unpacked the basket, fresh bread, a jar of preserves, some dried apples, and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the package. "Look inside," Rebecca replied, her attention still on Hannah. Jack unwrapped the paper to find a small book. Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. He looked questioningly at Rebecca. "Thought the girl might enjoy being read to," she explained, "and I remembered you like stories of survival against the odds." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Jack more deeply than he expected. How long had it been since anyone had thought about what might please him? Sarah had tried in the beginning, but grief had eventually consumed any consideration for small comforts. "Thank you," he said simply. Later that evening, with Hannah nestled beside him on the bed, Jack opened the book. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the pages as he began to read, his voice low and measured. "I was born in the year 1632, in the city of York, of a good family." Hannah listened, rapt, her eyes wide with wonder at the tale of a man stranded alone on an island. Jack paused occasionally to explain a difficult word, surprised by how easily the explanations came. His son Matthew had loved being read to as well. "Mr. Jack," Hannah asked during a pause, "do you think Robinson was scared all alone like that?" Jack considered the question, his weathered finger marking their place on the page. "I reckon he was. Being alone is a fearsome thing. But he wasn't really alone, was he? He had Friday eventually." "That's right," Jack said softly. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." Hannah leaned her head against his arm, her eyes growing heavy. "Like you helped me." Something tender and fragile unfurled in Jack's chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried with his son. "And you helped me too, little one." As Hannah drifted toward sleep, Jack continued reading, the words on the page blurring occasionally as memories of reading to Matthew overlapped with this moment. Two children, separated by years and blood, but connected by the simple comfort of a story told in the quiet of evening. Rebecca nodded, then turned back to Hannah. "You're healing well, but I want you to rest as much as possible for another day or two. Doctor's orders." "Yes, ma'am," Hannah agreed solemnly. When the examination was complete, Rebecca joined Jack at the table while Hannah played with Scout near the fire. "Payne's had been asking questions in town," Rebecca said in a low voice. "About Finch, about the girl, about your claim to the land." Jack's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions?" "He's trying to establish that Finch had no legal claim to any property in the territory, and he's telling people that Hannah would be better off in town, under proper supervision." "Meaning his," Jack said grimly. Rebecca nodded. "He's laying groundwork, Jack, making it look like he's concerned for the child's welfare while positioning himself to take control of whatever Finch left behind." She leaned closer. "I think he's afraid of what Finch might have told Hannah. Or what Finch might have given her," Jack added, thinking of the rose compass diagram. Rebecca hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "I did some asking around myself, discreetly." She unfolded a worn piece of paper. "This is a copy of the original property registry from 1879. See here? Your father's claim is recorded, signed and witnessed." Jack studied the document. His father's name was clear. Ethan Thornton, claiming 160 acres along Eagle Creek, registered April 14, 1879. This proves my claim is legal, he said. Rebecca's expression remained troubled. Keep reading. Below his father's entry was another. Thomas Finch, registering a mineral survey of the same area, dated June 30, 1879. And there was a notation in the margin. Boundary adjustment filed, October 1880. What does this mean? Jack asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. It means Finch surveyed the area after your father claimed it and found a discrepancy in the boundary markers, Rebecca explained. According to this note, he filed an adjustment that shifted the property line approximately 40 acres eastward. Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. So my father's claim was wrong? The land isn't legally mine? Not all of it, Rebecca admitted. But here's the strange part. Finch never enforced the adjustment. He filed it officially, but he never took steps to claim the 40 acres that should have been his, according to the corrected survey. Jack tried to make sense of this. His father had claimed land that, according to Finch's survey, wasn't entirely his to claim, but Finch had chosen not to contest it, despite having legal grounds to do so. Why, he wondered aloud. Why would Finch just let it go? Rebecca shrugged. I don't know, but it explains Payne's confidence about challenging your claim. He must have found Finch's adjustment filing. Or he had something to do with moving the boundary markers in the first place, Jack said darkly. Hannah said Payne and her father argued. What if it was about this? They both glanced at Hannah, who was teaching Scout to offer his paw on command, her face alight with simple joy, despite all she had endured. Whatever the truth is, Rebecca said quietly, I think it's in that rose compass diagram, and I think Payne knows it. Jack nodded slowly. We need to figure out what it shows before Payne comes back, and we need to be ready if he doesn't wait the full week. Rebecca squeezed his hand briefly. I'll keep my ears open in town. If Payne makes a move, I'll try to warn you. After she left, Jack spent the afternoon checking the cabin's defenses again, making sure ammunition was readily accessible and escape routes were clear. Hannah watched him curiously but didn't ask questions until he began boarding up one of the smaller windows. Are we hiding? She asked. Jack paused, hammer in mid-swing. Just being cautious. Winter storms can break windows if the wind gets strong enough. Hannah's expression made it clear she wasn't fooled. It's because of Mr. Payne, isn't it? Papa did the same thing before he got sick. Jack set down the hammer and knelt to her level. Hannah, I promise to keep you safe, and I will. But yes, I'm concerned about Payne. He seems very interested in you and in this land. Because of the copper, Hannah said matter-of-factly. Jack stared at her. What copper? The copper in the ground. Papa said it's why Mr. Payne wanted our home. There's copper under the hills. Valuable copper. That's what they argued about. This new information clicked into place like a missing piece of a puzzle. Copper was in high demand for the expanding electrical and telegraph industries. A copper deposit could be worth thousands, far more than the land itself. Hannah, does the rose compass show where the copper is? Jack asked urgently. The girl nodded. Papa said the compass points to the heart of the deposit. That's why it had to stay secret until he could file a proper claim with the territorial office. Jack's mind raced. If Thomas Finch had discovered copper on or near Jack's property, and if the boundary adjustment he'd filed but never enforced would give him legal rights to that copper. That's why Payne wants you, Jack realized. You're Finch's heir. If there's copper on this land, and if any part of it legally belongs to your father, then it would pass to you. Hannah's eyes widened with understanding. And Mr. Payne wants to be my guardian so he can control it. Exactly. Jack picked up the hammer again with renewed purpose, which is why we need to be ready for him. They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, Hannah helping in small ways, holding nails, fetching tools, while Jack secured the cabin. She told him more about life with her father, how they'd move frequently as he took surveying jobs across the territory, how he'd taught her to read using old newspapers and survey manuals. He always said knowledge was freedom, Hannah recalled, handing Jack another nail, that no one could take away what was in your head. Jack thought about his own limited education, how he'd struggled to read the poems to his son, how Sarah had gently corrected him without making him feel ashamed. He'd improved over the years, mostly out of necessity for running the ranch, but he still felt the lack keenly at times. Your father was right about that, he told Hannah. Education is something no one can steal. As dusk approached, they sat down to a simple meal of beans and the fresh bread Rebecca had brought. Hannah's appetite was improving daily, her body recovering its strength with the resilience of youth. "Mr. Jack," she said as they ate, "why did Mr. Payne say your claim isn't legal? Is it because of Papa's boundary adjustment?" Jack was surprised by her perception. "Partly, yes. It seems your father found that the original markers of my land were placed incorrectly, but he never forced the issue." "Because he liked you," Hannah said confidently. "He told me once that sometimes being right isn't as important as being kind." The simple statement gave Jack pause. Had Finch known all along who Jack was, even during their first meeting? Had he deliberately chosen not to claim land that was legally his out of some sense of compassion or connection? Before he could pursue this line of thought, Scout began to growl, a low warning sound that immediately put Jack on alert. The dog stood rigid by the door, hackles raised, ears forward. "Someone's coming," Jack said, reaching for his rifle. "Hannah, get behind the table." He doused the lamp with a quick movement, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the glow from the fire. Outside, he could hear the soft crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow, too stealthy for a friendly visitor. Jack positioned himself near the window, rifle ready, while Hannah crouched behind the solid oak table, Scout pressed against her protectively. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin. There was a moment of tense silence. Then a voice called out, "Jack Thornton, it's Elizabeth Payne. I need to speak with you." Jack remained motionless, suspicion warring with curiosity. Elizabeth Payne, Maxwell's wife, was rarely seen in town. What would bring her to his isolated cabin at dusk, apparently alone? "I'm alone," the voice continued, as if reading his thoughts. "And I don't have much time. Please, it's about the girl." With a warning gesture to Hannah to stay hidden, Jack moved cautiously to the door, rifle still ready. He opened it a crack, keeping his body positioned to block any attempted entry. Elizabeth Payne stood on his porch, a slender figure bundled against the cold. In her late 40s, she retained the elegant bearing of her Eastern upbringing, though years in the territory had weathered her delicate features. Her eyes, when they met Jack's, held a desperate intensity. "Mrs. Payne," Jack acknowledged warily, "this is unexpected. May I come in? It's not safe for me to be seen here." Jack hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her entry but keeping his rifle visible. Elizabeth moved past him into the cabin, her gaze immediately finding Hannah despite the girl's hiding place. "You must be Thomas Finch's daughter," she said softly. "You look like him around the eyes." Hannah emerged slowly from behind the table, Scout at her heels, still growling softly. "It's all right, Scout," Hannah murmured, though she remained cautious. Elizabeth removed her gloves and opened her coat, revealing an expensive dress of deep blue wool. From an inner pocket, she withdrew a small, leather-bound book. "My husband doesn't know I'm here," she said, turning back to Jack. "If he did—" She shook her head, leaving the consequences unspoken. "But I couldn't stand by any longer. Not after what happened to Thomas." "You and Thomas Finch, you knew each other well?" Jack asked carefully. Elizabeth's eyes clouded with something like regret. "We were friends years ago, before Maxwell showed his true nature. Thomas was the only one who saw Maxwell for what he truly was. I should have listened." She straightened her shoulders. "I've spent years watching my husband destroy lives for profit. Thomas was the final straw." "What do you mean? What happened to Finch?" Elizabeth's face tightened with suppressed emotion. "Maxwell claims Thomas died of pneumonia, but I know better. My husband had him poisoned." The blunt accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Hannah made a small, wounded sound, and Jack instinctively moved closer to her. "That's a serious charge, Mrs. Payne," he said carefully, "not one I make lightly." Elizabeth held out the book. "This is Maxwell's private journal. He keeps meticulous records of his business dealings, including his arrangement with a man named Hollister to ensure Thomas Finch wouldn't live to file his copper claim." Jack took the journal, his mind reeling with the implications. If what Elizabeth said was true, Payne had murdered Finch, or had him murdered, to get control of the copper deposit, and now he was after Hannah for the same reason. "Why are you telling me this?" Jack asked, his voice hard with suspicion. "Why betray your husband?" Elizabeth's composed facade cracked, revealing a deep weariness beneath. "Because Thomas Finch was a good man. Because his daughter deserves justice." She paused, twisting the gold band on her finger. "And because I can't live with myself anymore." She turned to Hannah, her voice softening. "You're not the first orphan my husband has taken an interest in, child. There have been 6 others in the past 3 years, all children whose parents owned land with mineral or timber rights. Maxwell becomes their guardian, sells off their inheritance, and places them in workhouses or indentures them to associates. And you've known about this?" Jack couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. Elizabeth met his gaze unflinchingly. "Yes, to my shame, I've known and done nothing until now." Her hand trembled slightly as she continued. "My own sister lost her husband in a mining accident 5 years ago. Their son, my nephew, became Maxwell's ward when she fell ill shortly after. He promised the boy would be cared for, educated." Her voice faltered. "I discovered last month that he'd been indentured to a logging camp in Idaho Territory. He died there last winter. Pneumonia, they said." She drew a deep breath, steadying herself. "Maxwell doesn't know I found out. I've been gathering evidence since then, waiting for the right moment." She gestured to the journal. "That book contains proof of everything. Names, dates, transactions. Enough to send him to prison if presented to the proper authorities." Jack's expression softened slightly, understanding dawning. "I'm sorry about your nephew." "William, sir," Elizabeth said quietly. "His name was William. He would have been 14 this spring." She straightened her shoulders. "I won't let it happen again. Not to Hannah, not to any child." Hannah moved to Jack's side, her small hand slipping into his larger one. "Did Mr. Payne really kill my papa?" Elizabeth's expression softened with genuine regret. "I believe he did, child. I'm sorry." Jack squeezed Hannah's hand gently, feeling her tremble. "What do you want from us, Mrs. Payne?" he asked, still wary despite the evidence she'd provided. "Nothing. I want you to use that journal to stop Maxwell before he hurts anyone else." She pulled her gloves back on with deliberate movements. "I've made my own arrangements to leave. By the time you act, I'll be on my way to St. Louis, to my sister's home." "He'll come after you," Jack warned. "Perhaps, but he'll have bigger problems by then." Elizabeth moved toward the door, then paused. "There's one more thing you should know. Thomas Finch and Maxwell were partners once, years ago. They surveyed this region together in '79. That's how Maxwell knows about the boundary discrepancy in the copper deposit. This new revelation further complicated the already tangled web. Jack thought back to his encounter with Finch 10 years ago. Had the surveyor already known then whose land he was on? Had he recognized Jack from some previous description by Payne? "Thomas spoke of you," Elizabeth continued, as if following Jack's thoughts. "He said he owed you a debt. I never understood why, but he was adamant about it." She pulled her coat tighter. "Whatever it was, it cost him his life. Maxwell couldn't bear the thought of Thomas warning you about the copper or the boundary issue." She opened the door, letting in a gust of cold air. "You have 4 days before Maxwell returns with the sheriff. Be ready." With that, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering darkness as quietly as she had come. Jack closed and bolted the door behind her, his mind racing with all he had learned. He turned to find Hannah staring at the journal in his hands, her young face a mask of grief and shock. "He killed Papa," she whispered, "for copper and money." Jack knelt beside her, setting the journal aside to place his hands gently on her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Hannah. So very sorry." The child's composure finally broke. With a heart-wrenching sob, she threw herself against Jack's chest, tears flowing freely. Jack held her as she cried, his own eyes burning with unshed tears for this brave girl who had lost everything to one man's greed. Long after Hannah's sobs had quieted to hiccups, they remained by the fire. Jack had moved them to the rocking chair, his father's chair, and now its gentle creaking was the only sound besides the crackling of the flames. Hannah's small weight rested against his chest, her breathing gradually evening out. "I miss him so much," she whispered, her voice raw. Jack's hand moved in slow circles on her back. "I know. Does it ever stop hurting?" Jack considered lying, offering the comfort of false hope, but Hannah deserved better. "No," he said softly, "but it changes, becomes different." Hannah lifted her tear-stained face. "How?" "Like water in a creek," Jack said, finding the words as he spoke them. "At first it's a flood, raging, drowning everything. You think it'll never stop. But time passes, and the flood recedes. The water's still there, still flowing, but you learn to live alongside it. Some days it rises again, but never quite so high." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words with a child's solemn consideration. "My mama died when I was little," she finally said. "I don't remember her much, just her hands and her singing." "That's something precious to keep," Jack murmured. "What do you remember about your boy?" Her question was gentle, tentative, as if understanding the weight of what she asked. Jack's breath caught. No one had asked him about Matthew in years, as if speaking of him might conjure his ghost. "His laugh," Jack said, the word rough-edged. "Sunshine through water. That's what it sounded like." He swallowed hard. And how he'd always find the first spring flower, no matter how small. Bring it to his mother like it was gold. Hannah reached up, her small fingers tracing the track of a tear Jack hadn't felt fall. "That's a good memory." "Yes," Jack agreed, his voice steadying. "It is." They sat together as the fire burned low, two souls finding momentary shelter in shared grief, in understanding that needed no further words. The rocking chair creaked softly, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, as outside the wind whispered through pine branches heavy with snow. Scout pressed against them both, whining softly in distress at his mistress's pain. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the promise of another storm. Inside, Jack Thornton made a silent vow to protect this child, to bring justice for her father, and to ensure that Maxwell Payne would never harm another orphan again. As Hannah's sobs gradually subsided, Jack continued to hold her, rocking gently as he had once done with his own son. The weight of responsibility settled on him like a physical thing, not just for Hannah's safety, but for her future, for the justice she deserved. And somewhere in that moment, Jack realized that Thomas Finch had given him a second chance, not just at saving his land, but at having a purpose beyond mere survival. Whether Finch had planned it that way or not, he had entrusted Jack with his most precious possession, his daughter. "I've got you," Jack murmured into Hannah's hair as she hiccuped against his chest. "I've got you now, and I won't let go." For the first time in many years, Jack Thornton made a promise he intended to keep with his very life. Dawn broke cold and clear the next morning. Jack had slept little, his mind turning over everything Elizabeth Payne had revealed. Hannah had finally fallen asleep near midnight, exhausted from grief and emotion, Scout keeping vigilant watch from the foot of her bed. Jack had spent the night reading Maxwell Payne's journal by firelight, each page revealing new depths to the banker's corruption and cruelty. Detailed accounts of land seized through forged documents, of orphaned children placed in exploitative apprenticeships, of bribes paid to officials who might have interfered. It was all meticulously recorded in Payne's precise handwriting. And there, on a page dated just 3 weeks earlier, was the entry that confirmed Elizabeth's accusation. Finch remains stubborn about the Eagle Creek claim. Hollister will resolve the matter before month's end. $100 paid in advance, 100 upon confirmation. Must appear natural, pneumonia or similar. Cold fury had risen in Jack as he read those words. The calculated murder of a man reduced to a simple transaction, a business expense. And now Payne was coming for Hannah, intending to use her as a pawn in his scheme to claim the copper deposit. With morning came resolution. Jack woke Hannah gently, offering her a simple breakfast while he outlined his plan. "We need to find the original boundary markers," he explained, "the ones your father documented in his survey. With those and the rose compass diagram, we can prove both my claim and your father's discovery of the copper deposit." Hannah listened intently, her eyes still reddened from the previous night's tears, but her expression determined. "How do we find them? The markers could be anywhere." "Not anywhere," Jack said. "According to Rebecca's copy of the registry, the adjustment your father filed moved the boundary 40 acres eastward. That means the original markers would be roughly a half-mile from the current fence line, near the creek bend. The rose compass might help, Hannah suggested, fingering her locket. Papa said it would point the way. Jack nodded. Let's study it again. See if we can make more sense of it now. They spread the small diagram on the table. Looking at it with fresh understanding, Jack could see that the radiating lines indeed formed a kind of map, with the central point presumably marking the heart of the copper deposit. Numbers along each line indicated distances, while letters might represent landmarks or terrain features. See here, Hannah said, pointing to a small X near the edge of the circle. Pop always put an X to mark where survey posts were placed, and these letters, OB next to one, 0 next to another. Old Bridge, Jack realized. Creek Rocks, they're landmarks near the property line. He looked at Hannah with newfound respect. You understand surveying? She nodded. Papa taught me, said it was good to know how to find your place in the world. Together they deciphered more of the diagram, translating Thomas Finch's shorthand into a workable map of the original boundary. By mid-morning they were ready to search for the markers, stone cairns that would have been placed at key points along the property line. It's cold out, but the sun's strong today, Jack said, helping Hannah into an old coat of his. The sleeves rolled up multiple times to fit her small frame. Stay close to me and tell me if you get too cold. Scout insisted on accompanying them despite his injured paw, limping determinedly beside Hannah as they set out across the snow-covered fields. Jack carried his rifle, ever vigilant for any sign they were being watched. Payne had spies, according to Elizabeth, and Jack wouldn't put it past the banker to have men monitoring his ranch. They followed Eagle Creek eastward, referring frequently to the rose compass diagram. The frozen landscape made the going difficult, especially for Hannah's shorter legs, but she pressed on without complaint, her face set with the same determination Jack had come to admire in her. Papa said perseverance was more important than strength, she told him as they paused for her to catch her breath. That keeping going when things are hard is what separates survivors from victims. Jack thought of his own struggles after Matthew's death, after Sarah left. How many times he'd considered simply giving up, letting the land go, disappearing into the vastness of the territory. Only stubbornness and the memory of his father's expectations had kept him going. Your papa was a wise man, he said. Seems he taught you well. They continued along the creek until they reached a bend where the water narrowed and ran swiftly beneath a thin crust of ice. According to the diagram, this was where they should begin looking for the first marker. There, Hannah said suddenly, pointing to a jumble of rocks half buried in snow near the creek bank. That looks like a cairn. Jack approached carefully, brushing away snow to reveal a deliberately constructed pile of stones. And there, carved into the base stone, were the initials TF and the date 1880. This is it, he confirmed, excitement rising. One of your father's original survey markers. They found 2 more cairns over the next hour, each in the locations indicated by the rose compass, each bearing Thomas Finch's initials and the same date. The markers formed a line that was indeed approximately half a mile east of the current fence, confirming that at some point, someone had moved the boundary markers to expand Jack's property. My father wouldn't have done this, Jack said, studying the third cairn. He was many things, but not a thief. He believed in the law. Maybe he didn't know, Hannah suggested. Papa said sometimes surveyors made mistakes, especially in the early days when they used less accurate equipment. Jack considered this. It was possible his father had claimed the land in good faith, using markers that were incorrectly placed by an earlier, less skilled surveyor. If Finch had discovered the error during his mineral survey in 1879, that might explain why your father filed the adjustment but never enforced it, Jack realized. He knew my father had claimed the land honestly, even if the boundaries were wrong. As they continued searching for the fourth and final marker, Hannah became quieter, her energy flagging after the long trek through snow. Scout, too, was struggling, his injured paw clearly paining him despite his determination to keep pace. We should head back soon, Jack said, noting the lengthening shadows. Winter days were short, and he didn't want to risk being caught out after dark. Just a little farther, Hannah pleaded. Papa's diagram shows the fourth marker near a standing dead pine. That's where the main copper vein is supposed to be. Jack relented and they pressed on toward a skeletal pine visible on a small rise ahead. As they approached, Scout suddenly stopped. His ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Jack immediately tensed, scanning the surroundings. Nothing moved in the winter landscape, but Scout's warning was enough. He motioned for Hannah to stay behind him as they advanced more cautiously. The dead pine stood like a sentinel on the rise, its bare branches stark against the blue sky. At its base, partially obscured by drifted snow, was what appeared to be another stone cairn. But as they drew closer, Jack noticed something else. Fresh tracks in the snow, boot prints leading to and from the tree. "Someone's been here," he said quietly. "Recently." Hannah clutched Scout's ruff, her eyes wide. "Mr. Payne's men?" "Maybe." Jack approached the cairn carefully, rifle ready. The snow around it had been disturbed, as if someone had been digging or searching. But the stones themselves appeared undisturbed, and when Jack brushed away the remaining snow, he found the expected markings. TF 1880. "It's one of Papa's markers," Hannah confirmed, looking over Jack's shoulder. "But why would someone come all the way out here to look at it?" Jack was wondering the same thing when he noticed something half buried in the snow nearby. A small metal object gleaming dully in the winter light. He reached down and picked it up. A surveyor's compass, its brass case tarnished, but the instrument inside intact. "This might have been your father's," he said, showing it to Hannah. She took it reverently, turning it over in her small hands. "It is. See the scratches on the back? Papa made those marks to track true north in this part of the territory." Her eyes widened suddenly. "Jack, I think this is the actual rose compass." "What do you mean?" "The diagram in my locket, it's based on readings from this compass. Papa always said a good surveyor could map an entire territory with just a compass and a measuring chain." She opened the instrument, revealing the compass face with its distinctive rose design. The copper deposits would distort the needle's reading in certain spots. That's how Papa found them. Jack looked from the compass to the stone cairn, understanding dawning. So these markers don't just show the true property line. They map the copper deposit too. Hannah nodded excitedly. "The fourth marker is the most important. Papa said it sits directly above the main vein." She pointed to the dead pine. "He used this tree as a natural marker. Anyone who knew what to look for could find it." The significance of their discovery was just sinking in when Scout began growling again, more urgently this time. Jack spun around, rifle raised, to see two mounted men emerging from the tree line to the north. Payne's men, he was certain, though he didn't recognize them specifically. "Hannah, run," he ordered quietly. "Head back toward the creek. Stay low and don't stop until you reach the cabin." "But now," his tone brooked no argument. "Take Scout and the compass. Go." Hannah hesitated only a moment before grabbing Scout and retreating down the slope, keeping the rise between herself and the approaching riders. Jack stood his ground, rifle ready but not yet aimed directly at the men. No point in starting a fight if it could be avoided. The riders approached slowly, warily, their own rifles visible but not yet raised. Jack recognized the deliberate intimidation in their posture, the casual confidence of men used to having their way through force or threat of force. "Afternoon," the lead rider called when they were within speaking distance. "You're a ways from your cabin, Thornton." "My land," Jack replied evenly, "free to walk where I please." The men exchanged glances. The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar running from temple to jaw, smiled without warmth. "Funny thing about that. Word is your claim might not be as solid as you think. Mr. Payne sends his regards, by the way. Says he's looking forward to your discussion in a few days." Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. "Is that why you're trespassing? To deliver a message?" "Just keeping an eye on Mr. Payne's interests," the second man said, "including the girl. She with you?" "No," Jack lied smoothly. "Left her at the cabin. Too cold for a child to be out walking." The scarred man's eyes narrowed skeptically. "That right? Because we heard you weren't alone." His gaze shifted to the tracks in the snow, too many for just one person. "My ranch hand," Jack said. "He's checking the western fence line." A tense silence fell, broken only by the soft nickering of one of the horses and the distant call of a crow. Jack knew the men didn't believe him, but they seemed reluctant to push the issue, for now. Will you give Mr. Payne's message some thought? The scarred man finally said. He's a reasonable businessman, willing to make it worth your while to cooperate regarding the girl and the land. He turned his horse. We'll be seeing you real soon, Thornton. Count on it. The implied threat hung in the cold air as the men rode away, disappearing back into the tree line from which they'd emerged. Jack waited until they were completely out of sight before lowering his rifle and releasing the breath he'd been holding. Payne was watching the property, and he knew about Hannah. Jack hurried back along their trail, following Hannah's smaller footprints in the snow. He found her waiting at the creek bend, Scout alert at her side, the compass clutched tightly in her hand. Were they Mr. Payne's men? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Jack nodded grimly. He knows you're here, and he knows we're looking for the boundary markers. He took her hand. Come on, we need to get back to the cabin and prepare. I don't think Payne's going to wait the full week before making his move. As they hurried back across the snow-covered fields, the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon. The brief daylight was fading, and with it, any illusion that they had time to spare. Payne was coming, and when he did, Jack would need every advantage he could muster to protect Hannah and the legacy her father had entrusted to them both. Darkness had fallen by the time Jack and Hannah reached the cabin. The windows glowed with warm light. Someone was inside. Jack immediately pushed Hannah behind him, raising his rifle as they approached. Stay back, he whispered, advancing cautiously toward the door. Before he could reach it, the door swung open, revealing Rebecca Sullivan, her medical bag on the table and a pot of something aromatic simmering on the stove. There you are, she said, relief evident in her voice. I was getting worried. Jack lowered his rifle, the tension draining from his shoulders. Rebecca, didn't expect you back so soon. Clearly, she replied dryly, ushering them inside. Her expression softened when she saw Hannah's exhausted face. You look half frozen, child. Come sit by the fire. As Hannah and Scout settled near the hearth, Jack pulled Rebecca aside, keeping his voice low. Payne's men were watching the property. They know Hannah's here. Rebecca's eyes widened. How much time do we have? Not much. They're reporting back to Payne now, I'd wager. Jack ran a hand through his graying hair. We found the original boundary markers, though. And this. He showed her the surveyor's compass Hannah had discovered. Rebecca turned it over in her hands, her brow furrowed. Thomas Finch's? Jack nodded. According to Hannah, it's the rose compass her father mentioned, the key to finding the copper deposit. He quickly explained what they had learned about the relationship between the boundary markers and the copper vein. Rebecca listened intently, then reached into her coat pocket. I have news too, from town. She produced a folded document, spreading it on the table. It was a notice from the territorial court authorizing Maxwell Payne to take temporary custody of Hannah Finch as a ward of the county. He's making his move officially, Rebecca explained. This gives him legal authority to take Hannah, effective immediately. Sheriff Martinez has already been ordered to assist if necessary. Jack stared at the document, anger burning in his chest. Martinez is in Payne's pocket, has been for years. Most of the town council, too, Rebecca agreed grimly. Payne's been generous with loans over the years. People owe him, either money or favors. So we can't count on help from town, Jack concluded. What about Lucas? Any word? Rebecca shook her head. Nothing yet, but Helena's a 4-day ride in good weather. He wouldn't have made it back yet, even if he left immediately. Jack glanced at Hannah, who had fallen asleep by the fire, Scout curled protectively beside her. The child had shown remarkable courage and resilience, but she was still just that, a child exhausted by grief and fear and the physical demands of their search. We need more time, he said. Time for Lucas to return with the official records. Time to document what we found. Rebecca's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Time is the one thing Payne won't give you. Not now that his men have seen you searching for the markers. She hesitated. Jack, have you considered that fighting this might put Hannah in more danger? What are you suggesting? His voice sharpened. I'm suggesting that sometimes retreat is the better part of valor. If you took Hannah and left, headed north to Canada, perhaps, or west to Oregon. Run? The word tasted bitter. Leave the land my father worked? The place where my son is buried? He shook his head firmly. No, besides, Payne would just send men after us. He wants that copper too badly to let Hannah slip away. Rebecca didn't argue further, recognizing the stubborn set of Jack's jaw. Instead, she moved to check on Hannah, placing a cool hand on the girl's forehead. No fever, at least. That's something. She looked back at Jack. If you're determined to stand your ground, you'll need help. Let me stay. Jack was touched by the offer but shook his head. Too dangerous, and you can do more for us in town. Be our eyes and ears there. Payne will know I've been helping you. All the more reason for you to maintain appearances. Return to town, act normally. If Payne suspects you're actively assisting us, he'll have you watch too. Jack squeezed her shoulder gently. Please, Rebecca. It's safer for everyone this way. She reluctantly agreed but insisted on staying long enough to share the meal she'd prepared. A hearty stew that was more substantial than anything Jack had managed in months. They ate in relative silence, the weight of the coming confrontation heavy on their minds. After dinner, while Hannah continued to sleep, Rebecca helped Jack take inventory of their supplies and weapons. One rifle, a shotgun, ammunition for both, enough food for perhaps a week if they were careful. Not much to withstand a siege, Rebecca observed quietly. It won't come to that, Jack replied, though he wasn't as confident as he sounded. Once we show the original markers and the rose compass to the territorial authorities, Payne's claims won't hold up. If you get the chance to show them, Rebecca countered, Payne's not likely to let it get that far. She was right, and they both knew it. Payne had too much to lose, not just the copper deposit, but his reputation, his freedom, if Elizabeth's journal was believed. Men like that didn't surrender without a fight. When Rebecca finally prepared to leave, the moon had risen, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. Jack walked her to her horse, the cold night air biting through his coat. Be careful, he said as she mounted. Payne might suspect you've been helping us. Rebecca looked down at him, her expression softened by moonlight. I've faced worse than Maxwell Payne. She hesitated, then added, Jack, whatever happens, you've done right by that child. Thomas Finch would be grateful. With that, she turned her horse toward town, soon disappearing into the darkness. Jack watched until he could no longer see her, a strange mixture of emotions churning within him. Fear for what was coming, determination to protect Hannah, and something else. A warmth he hadn't felt in years at having someone who believed in him, who saw his worth beyond the weathered exterior he presented to the world. Inside, Hannah had awakened and was sitting up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Did Dr. Sullivan leave? Jack nodded, closing the door against the cold. Back to town. She left us food, though. Hannah stroked Scout's head absently, her small face thoughtful. Those men today, they're going to come back, aren't they? With Mr. Payne. Jack saw no point in lying. Yes, probably soon. What will we do? The simple question deserved a simple answer. Jack knelt beside her, meeting her eyes directly. We'll protect what's yours, your father's discovery, your future, whatever it takes. Hannah considered this, then nodded solemnly. Papa would say that's right. She fingered the locket around her neck. He always told me that some things are worth fighting for, even when you're scared. Your father was a wise man, Jack said, meaning it. Later, as Hannah slept in the small bed they'd arranged for her near the fire, Jack sat at the table with Payne's journal and the rose compass, piecing together the full story as best he could. Thomas Finch and Maxwell Payne had been surveying partners in the late 1870s, mapping the territory for the government and railway companies. They had discovered the copper deposit together, but apparently disagreed about how to proceed. When Jack's father filed his homestead claim, part of the land overlapped with the copper find, a fact Finch noted in his boundary adjustment but chose not to contest. The answers weren't in the documents before him. Perhaps they never would be. But Jack was increasingly certain that Thomas Finch had orchestrated events with careful foresight, ensuring that if anything happened to him, his daughter would find protection with the one man who might have reason to stand against Maxwell Payne. A life for a life, Jack murmured, remembering Finch's words from that long-ago day. Had Finch already known then that their paths would cross again, in ways neither could have imagined? Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the cabin's eaves. Winter in Montana was unforgiving, but not nearly as unforgiving as the reckoning that was coming with Maxwell Payne. Jack checked his rifle one last time before banking the fire for the night. Tomorrow would bring challenges enough. Best to face them with what rest he could manage. The storm struck just before dawn, a howling blizzard that reduced visibility to mere feet and buried the landscape in fresh snow. Jack stood at the window, watching the white fury with mixed emotions. The storm would delay Payne and his men, buying precious time, but it would also prevent Lucas from returning if he was on his way and make any attempt to reach town for help impossible. Hannah joined him at the window, Scout at her heels. "It's like the storm that brought me here," she observed quietly. Jack nodded. Nature has its own timing. They spent the morning secure in the cabin, the blizzard raging outside. Jack took the opportunity to teach Hannah more about the ranch, how to care for the animals, where supplies were kept, escape routes if they became necessary. The girl absorbed everything with solemn attention, asking thoughtful questions that reminded Jack painfully of Matthew at the same age. By midday, the storm showed signs of weakening, the wind decreasing from a howl to a persistent moan. The snow continued to fall, but less violently, allowing occasional glimpses of the barn and corral. "We should check the animals," Jack said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Make sure the barn roof is holding up under the weight." Hannah immediately reached for her coat, the old one of Jack's she'd been using. "I'll help." Jack hesitated, reluctant to expose her to the cold, but recognizing her need to be useful. "Stay close to me. If I say run back to the cabin, you do it without question. Understood?" She nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. They ventured out into the snow, the wind still strong enough to sting their faces with ice crystals. The short walk to the barn was challenging, the fresh snow nearly knee-deep for Hannah. Scout bounded ahead, seemingly rejuvenated by the cold air despite his injured paw. Inside the barn, the animals were restless but unharmed. Jack checked each stall while Hannah filled water troughs from the pump, working with quiet efficiency. The normalcy of the chores was almost comforting, a reminder that life continued despite the threats gathering around them. They were nearly finished when Scout, who had been exploring the hayloft, began barking urgently. Jack tensed, reaching automatically for the rifle he'd brought with him. "Hannah, behind me," he ordered quietly, moving toward the barn door. Outside, barely visible through the swirling snow, were dark shapes approaching on horseback. At least 4 riders making steady progress along the road from town. "Back to the cabin," Jack said, keeping his voice level despite the surge of adrenaline. "Now!" Hannah didn't question him, grabbing Scout and hurrying toward the cabin through the deep snow. Jack followed, keeping himself between her and the approaching riders, his mind racing. 4 men at least. Payne wouldn't come himself, not in this weather, which meant these were hired guns, probably including the 2 who had confronted them the day before. They reached the cabin just as the riders emerged fully from the curtain of snow. Jack ushered Hannah inside, then turned to face them, rifle ready but not yet aimed. The lead rider was indeed the scarred man from yesterday, his face partially hidden by a scarf against the cold. He raised a gloved hand in mock greeting. "Thornton," he called through the wind, "got a message for you." "Kind of you to deliver it in this weather," Jack replied, not moving from the porch steps. "Must be important." The man dismounted, followed by his companions, 3 hard-faced men who positioned themselves with casual menace behind their leader. All were armed, though none had drawn weapons yet. "Mr. Payne sends his apologies for not coming personally," the scarred man said, approaching until he stood at the foot of the steps. "Weather being what it is, but he wanted you to have this without delay." He held out an envelope sealed with wax. Jack took it without lowering his rifle, breaking the seal one-handed. Inside was the court order Rebecca had shown him, authorizing Payne to take custody of Hannah, along with a note in Payne's precise handwriting. "Mr. Thornton, as you can see, the matter is now official. My men are authorized to take the girl into protective custody. Resist, and you will face charges of kidnapping in addition to the loss of your property. Be sensible. There is still time for a mutually beneficial arrangement. Miss Payne." Jack folded the note slowly, his expression revealing nothing of the anger burning inside him. "Tell Payne the girl stays with me until I speak with him personally. Not before." The scarred man's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "Afraid that's not an option." We've got orders to bring her back today. His hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Thornton. 4 against 1, Jack observed calmly. Seems you're expecting trouble. Just being thorough. Mr. Payne values the girl's safety. I'm sure he values what she represents, Jack countered. The copper deposit her father discovered. A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face before he could mask it. Don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think Payne sent you to silence Thomas Finch, and now you're here to take his daughter before she can reveal what she knows. Jack's voice hardened. I think you're Hollister. The accusation hit its mark. The scarred man, Hollister, stiffened, his hand now resting openly on his pistol. You've been listening to lies, Thornton. Now, are you going to hand over the girl, or do we need to come in and get her? Jack's answer was to raise his rifle, aiming it squarely at Hollister's chest. The girl stays. You can tell Payne to come himself if he wants to talk terms. Tension crackled in the cold air. Hollister and his men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. 4 against 1 were good odds, but the first man to make a move would likely take a bullet. This isn't over, Hollister finally said, backing toward his horse. Mr. Payne won't take kindly to defiance. Neither will the territorial judge when he learns what Payne did to Thomas Finch, Jack replied evenly, or what he's done to other orphans whose property he wanted. That stopped Hollister in his tracks. What are you talking about? We have Payne's journal, every transaction, every bribe, every murder, including the arrangements with you regarding Thomas Finch, all documented in Payne's own hand. Whether the journal actually contained such specific evidence was questionable, but Hollister couldn't know that. The uncertainty flickered across his scarred face. You're bluffing, he said, but with less conviction. Am I? Ask yourself, why would Elizabeth Payne have left town so suddenly? Why would she have visited this cabin the night before she departed? Jack was taking a calculated risk, revealing that Elizabeth had helped them, but he needed to plant doubt in Hollister's mind. The gambit worked. Hollister's expression darkened with uncertainty. He mounted his horse with a fluid motion, gesturing for his men to do the same. We'll be back, Thornton, with more men, and next time we won't be asking nicely. With that, he wheeled his horse and led his companions back into the swirling snow, soon disappearing from view. Jack remained on the porch until he was certain they were gone, his muscles tense, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of lingering threat. Only when the sound of hooves had completely faded did he allow himself to exhale the breath he'd been holding. The momentary victory felt hollow. They'd be back, and in greater numbers. But they had bought time, precious time. He entered the cabin, mechanically shaking snow from his coat, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the chill of confrontation that still lingered on his skin. Hannah stood by the table, scout pressed against her legs, her face pale but composed. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, a small pocket of safety in a world turning increasingly hostile. They wanted to take me away, she said. It wasn't a question, Jack nodded, hanging his coat by the door, his movements deliberately calm for her sake. They did, but they're gone for now. They'll come back. Yes, Jack saw no point in sugarcoating the truth. With more men, probably tomorrow after the storm passes. Hannah absorbed this with remarkable calm. What will we do? Jack considered their options, none of them particularly good. They could try to reach town, appeal directly to the territorial judge if they could get past Sheriff Martinez, but the roads would be impassable until the snow stopped, and Payne would have men watching. They could flee, as Rebecca had suggested, disappearing into the wilderness, but Winter made that a deadly proposition, especially with a child. Or they could stand their ground, using the boundary markers and the rose compass as leverage, hoping Lucas returned with the official records in time. We fight, Jack said finally. We protect what's yours, what your father wanted you to have. He knelt to her level, meeting her eyes directly. But Hannah, it's going to be dangerous, if there was any other way. I'm not afraid, she interrupted, her small chin lifting. Papa said courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared. Jack smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Your papa was right about a lot of things. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Jack moved furniture to create defensive positions within the cabin, stockpiled ammunition where it could be easily reached, and made sure Hannah knew where to hide if fighting broke out. The girl helped without complaint, her small face set with determination that reminded Jack painfully of her father. As dusk approached, the storm finally began to abate, the wind dying down to occasional gusts, the snow reduced to gentle flurries. The landscape outside the windows was transformed, a pristine expanse of white, broken only by the dark shapes of the barn and outbuildings. Beautiful, but also dangerous. The deep snow would make travel difficult for anyone approaching, but would also prevent any quick escape if needed. Jack was checking the shotgun one last time when a sharp knock at the door froze him mid-motion. Hannah looked up from where she was feeding Scout, her eyes wide with alarm. "Get behind the table," Jack whispered, moving silently to the window. Peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain, he saw a single figure on the porch, a woman, bundled against the cold, her back to the door as she watched the trail anxiously. "Rebecca." Jack opened the door quickly, ushering her inside. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous to be seen coming here now." Rebecca unwrapped the scarf from her face, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. "I had to warn you. Payne is gathering men, not just Hollister and his usual thugs, but townspeople. He's convinced them you've kidnapped Hannah, that you're unstable, dangerous." She shook snow from her coat. "Sheriff Martinez is deputizing a posse. They're coming at first light." Jack absorbed this grim news with outward calm, though inwardly he cursed. A legal posse changed things. Ordinary citizens would be involved, men who might otherwise have stayed neutral. "How many?" "At least a dozen when I left. Maybe more by now." Rebecca's gaze was sympathetic but unflinching. "Jack, you can't fight the whole town. I can't let them take Hannah either." He ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "Did you see any sign of Lucas returning?" Rebecca shook her head. "No, but the storm's been heavy for 2 days. He might be waiting it out somewhere." Hannah had approached silently, listening to their conversation with that same preternatural calm. "Is Dr. Sullivan going to stay with us?" Rebecca knelt to the girl's level, smiling gently. "I'm afraid not, sweetheart. I need to get back before I'm missed. But I brought something that might help." She reached into her coat and withdrew a folded document. "This is a medical certificate declaring you under quarantine for suspected scarlet fever. It's not much, but it might give Sheriff Martinez pause. He lost a daughter to scarlet fever 3 years ago." Jack took the document, touched by Rebecca's effort even as he doubted its effectiveness against Payne's determination. "Thank you." Rebecca rose, her expression grave. "There's something else. Elizabeth Payne never made it to St. Louis. Her stage was stopped outside of Blackwater Ridge. The driver said armed men took her off the coach." She met Jack's gaze directly. "Payne knows about the journal, Jack, and he's desperate to recover it before it can be used against him." "All the more reason for you to leave now," he told Rebecca. "It's not safe for you to be associated with us." Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "I've spent my life in this territory, Jack Thornton. I've faced blizzards and bandits and birth complications with nothing but my own 2 hands. I'm not afraid of Maxwell Payne." "You should be," Jack said quietly. "He killed Thomas Finch. He's taken his own wife. He won't hesitate to harm anyone who stands in his way." Rebecca's determined expression softened slightly. "I know the risks, but I also know what's right." She gathered her coat, preparing to leave. "I'll try to slow them down tomorrow. Tell Martinez the posse is unnecessary, that I can talk you into surrendering the girl peacefully. It won't stop them, but it might buy you a few more hours." Jack walked her to the door, conscious that this might be the last time he'd meet her. On impulse, he caught her gloved hand in his. "Rebecca, thank you for everything." She looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them. Regret for paths not taken, for years of distance that might have been friendship or more. "Take care of her, Jack, and yourself." The sound of hoofbeats faded as Rebecca rode away, swallowed by the vast silence of the winter night. Jack remained at the door longer than necessary, the cold air biting at his face, as though some part of him wanted to follow her, to call her back. Instead, he closed the door against the cold and turned back to the small world they had created inside these walls. a fragile sanctuary that tomorrow might shatter. He moved to the window, watching as Rebecca's silhouette disappeared into the darkness. Then as the moon began its slow climb over the ridge, the beauty of the night struck him anew, the silver light transforming ordinary snow into a sea of diamonds, the dark silhouettes of pine trees standing sentinel against the star-filled sky. His land, his home, the place where his son was buried, where his wife had left, where his heart had slowly hardened like the winter ground. Until Hannah. The girl had come like an unexpected thaw in the dead of winter, melting something he'd thought permanently frozen. She had rekindled in him a purpose beyond mere survival, a reminder of what it meant to protect someone who needed protection, to care again, despite the risk of loss. Whatever came tomorrow, he wouldn't let pain take that from either of them. Hannah joined him at the window, Scout at her heels as always. "It's pretty," she said softly. "Like a new world." "It is," Jack agreed. "Fresh starts are rare in this life, worth fighting for when they come." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the moon climb higher above the mountains. Tomorrow would bring violence and hard choices, but tonight there was just this moment of peace, this small connection between two wounded souls who had found each other against all odds. "Time for bed," Jack said eventually. "Tomorrow will come early enough." Hannah nodded but made no move to leave his side. After a moment, she slipped her small hand into his larger one. "Mr. Jack, when we get through this, could I stay here? With you?" Not long after Hannah had fallen asleep, Jack stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the crisp night air. He gazed up at the star-filled sky, the thought of his recent promise leaving him feeling both terrified and peaceful. The cold wind swept past, and Jack suddenly realized he was speaking to Matthew, his son, as if the boy could hear him. "You'd like her," he whispered into the darkness. "She's brave, just like you were." Words he hadn't uttered since the day he buried his son finally came forth. "I miss you, son, but I think I'm ready to start living again." When Jack turned back toward the cabin, Rebecca was standing in the doorway, her eyes regarding him softly. She had heard. Without saying anything, she simply placed her hand on his arm for a moment before stepping inside. Sometimes, Jack thought, the things left unsaid matter more than those spoken aloud. The simple question caught him off guard, a lump forming in his throat. "You'd want that? To live here on this ranch with a grumpy old man?" She nodded seriously. "Papa would want me to be somewhere safe, with someone who keeps his promises." She looked up at him, her young face earnest in the moonlight. "You keep your promises, don't you?" Jack squeezed her hand gently. "I do my best. And yes, Hannah, if we get through this, you have a home here for as long as you want it." The smile she gave him then was worth any risk, any fight that might be coming. It was the smile of a child who, despite everything she had lost, still believed in the possibility of happiness, of belonging. Jack Thornton had not made many promises in his life that truly mattered. But this one he intended to keep, no matter what Maxwell Payne threw at them. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having swept away to leave a crystalline blue sky and fresh snow that glittered blindingly in the morning light. Jack had been awake for hours, moving quietly around the cabin so as not to disturb Hannah, who had finally fallen into exhausted sleep near midnight. He checked and rechecked his weapons, positioned extra ammunition, and considered their defensive options. The cabin was sturdy, but not built for withstanding an assault. The barn offered better cover in some ways, with its thick walls and multiple exit points, but was too far from the house to reach safely if shooting started. Their best hope remained Lucas returning with the official records, or finding a way to reach the territorial judge directly with Payne's journal and the evidence of the boundary markers. But with a posse forming and the snow making travel difficult, those hopes were slim at best. A sound from the bed drew his attention. Hannah was sitting up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, Scout already alert at her side. "Morning," Jack said, forcing a normalcy to his voice that he didn't feel. "Hungry?" She nodded, sliding from the bed and coming to the table where Jack had laid out a breakfast of the last of their bread and some dried apple slices. As they ate, Jack explained what might happen when Payne's men arrived. "There will be a lot of them," he said, "and they'll have the sheriff with them, making it official-like. They'll demand I hand you over, probably threaten consequences if I refuse. Hannah listened with that unnervingly adult focus she often displayed. Will you refuse? Yes, Jack said simply. But Hannah, if things go badly, if they get into the cabin, or if I'm... He couldn't bring himself to say killed to the child, but she seemed to understand. If you can't protect me anymore, she finished for him. Jack nodded. There's a space under the floorboards in the corner by the fireplace. Small, but big enough for you and Scout. If I tell you to hide, you get in there and you stay quiet until it's safe to come out. How will I know it's safe? Her voice was steady, but Jack could see the fear she was working so hard to control. Rebecca will come for you, he said with more confidence than he felt. Or Lucas, if he makes it back. They'll call your name, your full name. Hannah Elizabeth Finch. Don't come out for anyone else, no matter what they say. Hannah nodded solemnly, absorbing the instructions. What about the journal and the rose compass? Keep them with you. They're the proof of everything. Your father's discovery, Payne's crimes. Jack reached across the table to squeeze her hand gently. Your father entrusted them to you for a reason. He believed in you, and so do I. They finished breakfast in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Jack washed the few dishes while Hannah dressed in her own clothes, now clean and mended after her ordeal in the snow. The simple domesticity of the morning routine felt surreal against the backdrop of the coming confrontation. It was mid-morning when they heard the first distant sounds of approach, the muffled crunch of many horses moving through deep snow, the occasional shout as riders communicated with each other. Jack moved to the window, rifle ready, and confirmed his worst fears. At least 15 men were approaching along the road from town, Sheriff Martinez at their head, Maxwell Payne himself riding just behind. They're here, he said quietly. Hannah, gather what you need and be ready to hide if I say so. The girl moved quickly, securing the journal and compass in a small bundle along with a few personal items. Scout watched anxiously, sensing the tension, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Jack positioned himself near the door, rifle in hand, but not yet raised. No point in appearing immediately hostile, though he had no illusions about how this confrontation would likely end. His only hope was to somehow separate Payne from the posse, expose his true motives before violence became inevitable. The riders came to a halt about 50 yards from the cabin, forming a loose semicircle. Sheriff Martinez dismounted. Mounted, along with Payne and two other men Jack recognized as members of the town council. The rest remained on horseback, some holding rifles across their saddles, not threatening, but ready. Stay inside, Jack told Hannah, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. Sheriff Martinez approached, his expression grim beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 55, Martinez was a capable lawman when not under Payne's influence. Fair-minded, generally decent, though lacking the courage to stand against the town's most powerful citizen. Thornton, question he called. Need to talk to you about the Finch girl. Sheriff, Jack acknowledged, keeping his rifle pointed downward but visibly ready. Seems like an awful lot of men for a simple conversation. Martinez had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mr. Payne was concerned for the child's safety. Said you might be uncooperative. Did he mention why I might have reason to be? Jack countered. Did he tell you about Thomas Finch, the girl's father? About how he died? Payne stepped forward then, immaculate despite the journey through the snow, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as a man, apart from the working men surrounding him. At 48, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power and deference. Now, Thornton, let's not complicate matters with irrelevant details, he said smoothly. The fact is, Hannah Finch is an orphan and a ward of the county. I have the legal authority to take her into protective custody. He gestured to one of the councilmen who held up the court order. The document is quite clear. So is your wife's testimony, Jack replied, watching Payne's face closely. About how you arranged Thomas Finch's death, about the other orphans whose property you've stolen. All of it recorded in your own journal, which is now safely beyond your reach. Payne's composure slipped for just an instant, a flash of rage darkening his features before the smooth mask returned. Absurd accusations. Elizabeth has been unwell, suffering delusions. It's why I've arranged for her to receive treatment at a private sanitarium back east. Is that what you call abducting her from the stagecoach? Jack kept his voice loud enough to carry to the assembled men. Strange kind of treatment that requires armed men to enforce it. A murmur ran through the posse at this accusation. Martinez looked uncertainly at Payne, who maintained his composed exterior despite the growing tension. I don't know what stories Elizabeth may have told you, Payne said, his voice hardening slightly, but I assure you she was in no state to make rational decisions. Much like yourself, it seems. He turned to Martinez. Sheriff, I believe we've indulged this nonsense long enough. Please execute the court order and take custody of the girl. Martinez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but bound by his official duty. Thornton, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The girl will be cared for properly. Like the other orphans Payne has taken? Jack challenged. Ask him what happened to the Jensen children after their parents died in that fire. Or the Cooper boy when his father was killed in the mine collapse. All had property Payne wanted. All disappeared into proper care that somehow ended with Payne controlling their inheritance. The murmuring among the posse grew louder. Several men exchanged troubled glances, their certainty visibly wavering. Payne recognized the shift in mood and moved quickly to counter it. Enough, he snapped. These are desperate lies from a desperate man. Thornton is facing foreclosure on his property. He's using the child as leverage, nothing more. He turned to the assembled men. He's armed and clearly unstable. Sheriff, do your duty. Martinez drew himself up, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Jack, I've got 15 men here. Don't make me use them. Just send the girl out, and we can sort this all out in town with the judge. Jack stood his ground. The girl stays with me until Judge Wilson himself comes out here to review the evidence, not before. Evidence of what, exactly? Payne demanded, his patience visibly fraying. What possible legitimate reason could you have for defying a legal court order? Evidence that Thomas Finch discovered a copper deposit on land that rightfully belongs to his daughter, Jack said clearly, ensuring every man present could hear. Evidence that you had Finch killed to prevent him from filing his claim. Evidence that you've been systematically stealing from orphan children for years. The accusation hung in the cold air, impossible to ignore. Several men in the posse shifted uncomfortably on their horses. Martinez looked genuinely troubled now, his hand moving away from his weapon. Those are serious accusations, Thornton, he said slowly. Do you have proof? I do, Jack nodded toward the cabin. Finch's original survey markers showing where the true boundary of my property lies and where the copper deposit is located. His surveyor's compass that led him to the discovery, and Payne's own journal documenting his dealings with a man named Hollister to ensure Finch's unfortunate demise. At the mention of Hollister, a ripple of recognition passed through some of the older members of the posse. Hollister's reputation as a hired gun was apparently known to them. Payne's facade of reasonableness finally cracked. This is preposterous. You're stalling, Thornton, nothing more. He turned to the assembled men. He's obstructing justice and endangering a child. Anyone who brings the girl out safely will be rewarded. $500 in trial. The bounty changed the mood instantly. Where there had been uncertainty, now there was calculation. $500 was more than many of these men earned in a year. Jack raised his rifle slightly, not aiming at anyone specific but making his determination clear. The first man who tries to enter this cabin will be shot. The girl stays until Judge Wilson reviews the evidence. That's final. For a tense moment, it seemed violence was inevitable. Then a new voice entered the standoff, female, authoritative, and unafraid. Gentlemen, perhaps I can offer a solution. Rebecca Sullivan emerged from the tree line to the east, mounted on her sturdy roan mare. She approached confidently, seemingly unconcerned by the gathered posse or the tension crackling in the air. Dr. Sullivan, Martinez acknowledged, a hint of relief in his voice at this potential mediation. This isn't a place for a lady right now. On the contrary, Sheriff, this is precisely where a medical professional should be. Rebecca dismounted gracefully, moving to stand between Jack and the posse. I've been treating Hannah Finch since Mr. Thornton found her half frozen in the snow. The child has been through a traumatic ordeal and is still recovering. Moving her now would be medically inadvisable. Payne's expression darkened. With all due respect, doctor, your medical opinion doesn't override a court order. Perhaps not, Rebecca agreed smoothly, but the Territorial Health Code does grant me authority to impose quarantine in cases of suspected contagious disease. She produced the certificate she had shown Jack the night before. Hannah Finch is showing symptoms consistent with scarlet fever. I've declared a 10-day quarantine of these premises, effective immediately. The effect was immediate. Several men in the posse reined their horses back involuntarily, the fear of disease overriding even the lure of Payne's offered reward. Martinez himself paled slightly. The loss of his daughter to scarlet fever is still a raw wound. Scarlet fever, he repeated. You're certain? Certain enough to execute my authority under territorial law, Rebecca replied firmly. I've posted the official notice on the property boundary. She pointed to a small sign now visible on a nearby fence post, the red quarantine symbol unmistakable, even at a distance. Payne was visibly seething now, his carefully maintained control slipping further. This is a transparent delaying tactic, nothing more. The girl was perfectly healthy yesterday, according to my men who saw her. Early symptoms can be subtle, Rebecca countered. As a medical doctor, I'm qualified to make that determination. You, Mr. Payne, are not. She turned to Martinez. Sheriff, I understand you have a court order to execute, but I suggest you consider whether forcing entry into a quarantine property and potentially exposing yourself and these men to scarlet fever is truly in the public interest. Martinez was clearly torn, caught between his obligations to Payne and his genuine fear of the disease that had claimed his daughter. The men of the posse were equally uncertain, many of them now keeping a noticeable distance from the cabin. Into this moment of hesitation came the sound of approaching horses, a small party coming from the north, moving rapidly despite the deep snow. Jack squinted against the sun's glare on the white landscape, then felt a surge of hope. Leading the group was Lucas, accompanied by 3 other riders, one of whom wore the distinctive uniform of a territorial marshal. Looks like we have more company, Jack observed, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. Payne turned sharply, following Jack's gaze, his expression hardening as he recognized the approaching party. This changes nothing. The court order stands. We'll see about that, Jack replied. Lucas and his companions reached the assembled group a few minutes later, their horses breathing heavily from the exertion of plowing through the snow. The territorial marshal, a weathered man in his 50s with a star pinned to his coat, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. Quite a gathering, and he observed dryly. Someone mind telling me what's happening here? Martinez stepped forward, relief evident in his bearing at having a higher authority to defer to. Marshal Evans, we're executing a county court order regarding an orphaned child. Dr. Sullivan has raised concerns about possible contagion. Evans nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Lucas. This the situation you described on the trail? Lucas dismounted, moving to stand beside Jack. Yes, sir. Just as I told you. The marshal addressed the entire gathering. I've received serious allegations regarding Maxwell Payne's conduct in several matters, including the death of Thomas Finch and subsequent attempts to take control of his minor daughter and property. He produced an official-looking document from inside his coat. I have here a stay of execution on any county orders regarding Hannah Finch, pending a full investigation by the territorial court. Payne's face flushed with anger. On what grounds? What possible jurisdiction does the territorial court have in a simple guardianship matter? When that simple guardianship matter involves allegations of murder, fraud, and criminal conspiracy crossing county lines, the territory takes an interest, Evans replied evenly. He turned to another of his companions, a bespectacled man clutching a leather satchel. Mr. Peterson here is the territorial surveyor. He's reviewed the original boundary filings for this property and found significant discrepancies that coincide with Mr. Chen's testimony about the copper deposit in the true location of the boundary markers. Jack felt a surge of gratitude toward Lucas, who had clearly accomplished far more than simply retrieving documents. He had brought back justice itself. This is absurd, Payne spluttered, though his confidence was visibly crumbling. These are baseless accusations from a squatter trying to steal valuable mineral rights, nothing more. Evans regarded him coolly. We also have statements from Elizabeth Payne, taken after territorial agents intercepted the men who removed her from the stagecoach. She had quite a lot to say about your business practices, Mr. Payne, and your journal makes for interesting reading. At the mention of the journal, Payne's composure finally shattered completely. Whatever Elizabeth gave you is a forgery, he snapped, and Thornton is lying about having my journal. It's all fabrications, designed to slander me and steal what's rightfully mine. What's rightfully yours? Jack couldn't contain his contempt. You mean the copper deposit that Thomas Finch discovered? The one you had him killed over? Or do you mean Hannah, another orphan whose inheritance you plan to steal? Just like all the others. Payne's hand moved suddenly toward his coat. Jack tensed, expecting a weapon, but instead Payne pulled out a folded document. I have proof of my legal claim to the mineral rights, he declared, waving the paper. A partnership agreement with Thomas Finch, signed and witnessed, giving me full rights to any discoveries made during our surveying work. The territorial surveyor, Peterson, adjusted his spectacles and reached for the document. May I? Reluctantly, Payne handed it over. Peterson examined it carefully, then passed it to Marshal Evans with a significant look. The signature date is October 1880, Peterson noted, but the paper is machine-processed wood pulp with a Whiting Mill watermark, a type that wasn't produced until 1883. He looked up at Payne. This document is a forgery, Mr. Payne. Rather an amateur one at that. A murmur ran through the assembled men. Payne's face contorted with rage as he realized his carefully constructed facade was crumbling around him. You're all fools, he snarled. That copper deposit is worth thousands, tens of thousands, and you'd let it go to a squatter and an orphaned brat on the basis of fabricated evidence? The only fabrication here is your claim to the land, Jack said quietly. Thomas Finch knew the truth. He documented it, and he made sure his daughter would find her way to someone who would protect her from you. Payne's control finally snapped completely. With a curse, he drew a concealed derringer from his coat and aimed it directly at Jack. The girl belongs to me. The copper, the land behind them. All of it. Everything happened at once. Jack raised his rifle. The men of the posse scattered for cover. Marshal Evans drew his sidearm, and from within the cabin came a small, clear voice. No, Mr. Payne, they belong to me. Hannah stood in the doorway, Scout at her side, holding her father's compass in one small hand and Payne's journal in the other. Her face was solemn but unafraid as she faced the man who had orchestrated her father's death. My papa found the copper. He marked the boundaries. He made the maps. Her voice carried clearly in the sudden stillness. And he told me to find Mr. Jack because he knew Mr. Jack would protect me from you. The simple truth of her words seemed to hover in the crisp winter air. For a moment, no one moved. Then Payne, his face twisted with thwarted greed and rage, shifted his aim from Jack to Hannah. If I can't have it, neither will you, he snarled. Jack moved without thinking, throwing himself forward as Payne's finger tightened on the trigger. The derringer cracked sharply in the cold air. Jack felt a burning impact in his shoulder as he collided with Payne, driving the banker to the ground with his full weight. Shouts erupted around them. More shots were fired. By whom? Jack couldn't tell through the haze of pain that enveloped him. He was vaguely aware of Payne struggling beneath him, then of the man being dragged away by Marshal Evans and another of the riders. Jack! Hannah's voice, high with fear. Mr. Jack! He tried to push himself up, but his left arm wouldn't support him. Warm wetness spread across his shoulder and down his chest. Blood, he realized distantly. The world seemed to be receding, sounds becoming muffled, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of light surrounded by encroaching darkness. Stay with me, Jack Thornton. Rebecca's voice close to his ear as gentle hands turned him over. Don't you dare slip away now. He tried to focus on her face, hovering above him with concern etched in every line. Hannah, he managed to whisper. She's fine, Rebecca assured him. Not a scratch on her. You took the bullet meant for her. Relief washed through him, stronger than the pain. Good. That's good. More hands were lifting him now, carrying him toward the cabin. Through the narrowing tunnel of his vision, he could see Hannah's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched Scout to her chest. Lucas stood protectively beside her, one hand on her small shoulder. You'll be all right, Rebecca was saying, though her voice seemed to come from very far away. The bullet went clean through. I can treat this. Just stay with me, Jack. Stay with me. He wanted to tell her he wasn't going anywhere, that he had promises to keep. To Hannah, to himself, to the memory of Thomas Finch. But the darkness was closing in, his strength ebbing with each beat of his heart. As consciousness slipped away, his last thought was of Hannah's small hand in his, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to hope for until now. A life for a life. The circle was complete. Time passed in strange currents while Jack floated in darkness. Occasionally, fragments of reality would break through. A cool cloth on his forehead, the bitter taste of medicine. Rebecca's voice giving quiet instructions, Hannah's smaller one asking questions. Pain would flare and recede like tide against shore, never quite leaving, but sometimes allowing moments of peace. In his fever dreams, he saw Thomas Finch standing at the edge of the frozen creek, nodding in approval. Then gradually the darkness thinned, like morning fog lifting from the valley. Awareness returned slowly, in pieces that began to form a coherent whole. The crackling of fire in the hearth, the weight of blankets tucked carefully around him. The sharp, clean smell of antiseptic mingled with the familiar sense of his cabin. Wood smoke, coffee, the pine boughs Hannah had gathered to make the house smell like Christmas, as she'd put it. Pain, dull and throbbing in his left shoulder. And voices, low and careful, somewhere nearby. Voices of people who had risked everything to stand with him. Jack opened his eyes to find himself in his own bed, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. How long had he been unconscious? Hours? Days? He's awake! Hannah's voice, bright with relief. Small footsteps hurried toward him, followed by Scout's lighter patter. Jack turned his head to see Hannah's face, beaming despite the worry still evident in her eyes. "Hello, little one," he managed, his voice rough from disuse. "Dr. Sullivan said you'd be all right, but you've been sleeping for 2 whole days," Hannah informed him solemnly. "Scout and I have been keeping watch." And the puppy, as if to confirm this, placed his paws on the edge of the bed and woofed softly. Jack managed a small smile, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. 2 days? Seems I needed the rest." Rebecca appeared beside Hannah, her professional demeanor not quite hiding her relief at seeing him conscious. "You lost a lot of blood, Jack Thornton. Another few inches to the right and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Jack attempted to sit up, but Rebecca's firm hand on his good shoulder prevented him. "Not yet. You need to regain your strength." "Pain, hey, you say?" he asked, the memory of the confrontation returning in vivid flashes. "In custody," came another voice. Lucas stepped into view, nodding and greeting. Marshal Evans arrested him on multiple charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. The journal was quite damning, especially combined with Elizabeth Payne's testimony. "She's safe then, Elizabeth?" Rebecca nodded. "Territorial agents intercepted Payne's men before they could take her far. She's in Helena now, assisting with the case against her husband. From what I hear, she's proving quite cooperative." Jack absorbed this information with a sense of ease that went beyond the physical. Payne would face justice. Hannah was safe. The nightmare was over. "And the land?" he asked. "The boundary dispute?" "Resolved," Lucas replied with a hint of satisfaction. The territorial surveyor confirmed Thomas Finch's original markers. The 40 acres in dispute legally belonged to Hannah as her father's heir, including the copper deposit. "Your claim to the remaining 120 acres is secure." Jack closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the completion of a circle that had begun 10 years ago when a stranger pulled him from an icy creek. Thomas Finch had saved his life then. Now, in protecting Hannah, Jack had repaid that debt, and perhaps found redemption for his own failures in the process. "There's something else," Rebecca added, her tone softening. "We found a letter in Payne's saddlebags. It was addressed to you, from Thomas Finch, dated just weeks before his death. Payne must have intercepted it." She handed him a worn envelope, unsealed and creased from rough handling. Jack took it with his good hand, his heart quickening at the sight of the now familiar handwriting. The letter was brief but revelatory. "Thornton, by now you may have realized our meeting 10 years ago was a mo accident. I had been tracking your movements since learning your father had inadvertently claimed land containing a significant copper deposit. My initial intent was to confront you, to demand the return of what was rightfully mine. But when I found you half drowned in that creek, I saw a man who had suffered enough loss already. The land seemed less important than the life before me. I've watched you from a distance since then, a man of integrity struggling against fate's cruelty. If you are reading this, it means my suspicions about Payne were correct, and I am no longer able to protect my daughter. There is no one I would trust more with her safety and future than the man who taught me that some things are worth more than property or profit. A life for a life, as we agreed. Take care of Hannah. The land and whatever it holds are less important than the heart that tends them. Thomas Finch. Jack lowered the letter, emotion tightening his throat. Finch had known all along whose land he was surveying, had deliberately saved Jack that day with full knowledge of their connection. And in the end, he had entrusted his most precious possession, his daughter, to Jack's care, believing in him when Jack had stopped believing in himself. Papa knew you would help me, Hannah said quietly, having read the letter alongside him. He said you were a man who kept his word. Jack looked at her, this brave, remarkable child who had endured so much loss yet retained such resilience. I promised you could stay here if we got through this, he said. I meant it. Hannah's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I know, Papa was right about you. The cabin door opened, admitting Marshal Evans, his expression grave but not unkind. Good to see you awake, Thornton. Doc Sullivan said you were too stubborn to and I see she was right. Jack acknowledged the greeting with a nod. Thank you for arriving when you did, Marshal. Things might have ended differently otherwise. Thank your man Chen here, Evans replied. Rode through that blizzard like the devil himself was on his trail, then convinced me and my deputies to do the same. He glanced at Hannah. Now I have some official business with Miss Finch, if you're feeling up to it. Hannah straightened, her small face suddenly solemn. Yes, sir? Evans produced an official-looking document. The territorial court has reviewed the circumstances of your situation and issued a temporary guardianship order. He glanced at Jack. In light of recent events and your expressed wishes, the court has named Jack Thornton as your legal guardian, pending a formal hearing once he's recovered. The simple announcement affected Jack more profoundly than he would have expected. He had promised to keep Hannah safe, had grown to care for her deeply in their short time together, but the official recognition of that relationship made it real in a way that caught him unprepared. Is that all right with you, Hannah? He asked, suddenly uncertain. There might be other arrangements, relatives back east perhaps. There's no one else, Hannah said firmly, and even if there were, I'd choose to stay here. She looked around the cabin, at Scout warming himself by the fire, at Lucas and Rebecca standing nearby, at the land visible through the windows, her father's legacy and now her own. This is home now. Home, the word resonated in Jack's mind, filling empty spaces that had been hollow for too long. His gaze met Rebecca's, finding warmth and something more in her eyes. A promise of possibilities neither of them had dared to acknowledge before. The winter sun slanted through the windows, bathing the cabin in golden light. Outside, the snow-covered land stretched toward distant mountains, pristine and full of promise. There would be challenges ahead: Jack's recovery, the formal guardianship hearing, decisions about the copper deposit and how best to honor Thomas Finch's legacy. But for now, in this moment, there was peace, there was healing. There was the beginning of something that felt remarkably like family. Hannah took his hand, her small fingers curling trustingly around his larger ones. Mr. Jack, when you're better, can we plant a garden where the sun hits first in spring? Papa always said new life needs to be marked in the earth somehow. Jack squeezed her hand gently, his heart full. Yes, Hannah, we can plant a garden. He looked around at the people who had risked everything to stand with them. Rebecca, Lucas, even Marshal Evans in his way. I think there's plenty of new life to mark here. Outside, the winter wind sang through the pines, a melody of endings and beginnings, of loss and discovery, of promises kept and debts repaid. And within the cabin's walls, something long dormant began to stir and grow, taking root in hearts that had thought themselves barren, like seeds beneath snow, waiting for spring.